Okay. So we open the meeting in executive session, so we will continue the meeting now. Welcome to everyone, April 4, 2022. Okay, we've got a few presentations tonight. I will pass the meeting over to Dr. McCursey to kick us off with some highlights and announcements.
Thank you, and I thank the principals for being here, and so Laura, Amy, not principal, but Director of Special Ed, Amy, Jennifer, Lou, and later we'll hear from Drew regarding athletics. So I will be brief. If on the Friday Lighter, in the Friday Lighter, I celebrate our science research program. Amazing set of accomplishments. So I'd urge everyone in the community to find that letter and read it, because there are 14 students featured in there, and one of whom I will name names, Charlotte Rubin, who is headed to the national level. And I was lucky enough, and Lou was in the room, I was lucky enough to have her rehearse her presentation for me, and others also were recipients of that rehearsal. But she was remarkable, and so as I said to Melissa Shandroff, I'm glad that my opinion was both valid and reliable, statistically speaking, in that how she did. But it's truly an amazing program, and I urge people to read the letter and the testimony that Melissa Shandroff wrote about her students. Not in Friday's letter was that this weekend some 60 elementary, middle school, and high school students performed at the New York State School Music Association Festival. So that's an incredible number of students performing. The PBIS Positive Behavior Intervention Support Program is up and running again at the middle school. So we're excited to have that focus on students and student support again happening. Also on Friday's letter, I celebrated what I call winning with character. And our boys varsity basketball team and Coach Bob Del Bogovi gained major recognition for a sportsmanship award, and Drew, you may speak to that later a little, but that's a gigantic accomplishment. Next to last, this is National Poetry Month, so I put a challenge out to the community, and I did run that by the chair of our English department before I did that, and he approved. So we'll see how many staff or student written poems come back, and I did use a hopeful stance, going to a certain poet from 1860s roughly, and if anyone can name the poet I cited, you get a bonus. But you know, poetry goes anywhere and everywhere. I was hoping it would go to a hopeful place. And board, if you want to submit and see, but it has to be something you've written, and then we'll see what we do. Lastly, if you're in the school today, you may have noticed a lot of people, including administrators, wearing HTA shirts. And they do a series across the year called Solidarity Days. And it's days where they, as an organized body, a collective bargaining, a union, are in keeping with key moments in the labor movement. So today it was in honor of the Memphis sanitation workers strike. And if you know your history, that was actually what had brought Dr. King to Memphis. And he, around the time he was there, gave the I have been to the mountaintop speech, and quite tragically we know what happened within a couple of days at that point. So this is actually, there are a lot of days of solidarity. This one actually got more people wearing their shirts because I think of what the larger meaning to that. So those are my announcements. COVID has to be on the list. Fortunately, we're running zeros. Just the other side of the border, Connecticut, I'm hoping it'll stay there. There are districts with nervousness and levels that are higher, but right now we're in Westchester County, and particularly in Hastings, doing very, very well. And so I'm pleased that we're all working hard at that. We are distributing tests a lot. We have some, I think, 14,000 tests, is that right, Maureen, that we've been distributing? So there's probably some good
We sent out 7,000 last week.
Yeah, so I think the availability of tests could have been here earlier, but we've got them and we're sharing them, and we just need to keep testing and staying healthy. So let me stop there at this point and get back to the rest of the agenda.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. Melissa Szymanski for our Assistant Superintendent report, please.
So the K-12 Mathematics Committee has been hard at work, and we've been using a mathematical mindset rubric that the group was working on developing last year in partnership with our colleague Kathy Williams from Stanford University, who's been a thought partner with us. So we've taken the mathematical mindset rubric, we've made it our own, we've integrated some of the computer science and digital fluency standards, and we use that to anchor outcomes for students. And what we've done is begun a lesson study process, which is really exciting. So lesson study is an opportunity to put multiple minds together around a lesson that's about to be taught. And so it's a design process where someone volunteers to be the facilitator, but really it's the whole group that creates the learning experience for the students. And it's very synergistic. We grounded it in the rubric in terms of the student outcomes. And then each of us picked an area of focus that we would look for. Dr. Greg Stevens, our mathematics department chairperson, actually volunteered to host it within his AB Calculus class. And we asked him what would be helpful to him for us to have a lens on. As professionals, we were talking about what we were curious about as it relates to the rubric. And it really is a very powerful job-embedded professional learning experience. And dare I say, we actually had a ton of fun designing it, and we went in there. We had 2 high school mathematics teachers, a teacher from the elementary school and me, and Greg Stevens facilitated, and it was really fantastic. Prior to the lesson, one of the teachers had remarked how she had never really had the opportunity to see a colleague teach an entire lesson before like that. And so that is done by design, where it's really a concerted amount of time with a very specific lens, and being able to see what students are doing with their learning, how they're responding, some of the teacher moves. And so during our next mathematics committee session, we'll be debriefing that, and everyone's brought some data, we'll bring student work, but it's really quite powerful. And one of the teachers, while we were in there, also remarked on the culture of the classroom and how students were feeling safe to be making mistakes and taking risks, and then wondering about, what might some pivots be in another room to help that kind of culture emerge too. So it's a really symbiotic experience, and it's something that I value very greatly, and I appreciate that everyone took the risk to be vulnerable, to participate. It was highly supportive. So big win for all of us, and again, a whole lot of fun. So we'll be debriefing the lesson, we'll be grounding it in some of the concrete observations, and then we'll be talking about what worked well and how do we make it even better. Proposed English electives. So Gerard Marciano, high school English teacher, is going to be retiring for the district at the end of the year, as you know. And historically, he's taught 2 electives, theater arts and 60s culture. So we're interested in shifting these electives to the 2 electives, building a better bookshelf, literacy of the 21st century, and that's developed from discussions with Janice Mateo Toledo and opportunities to enhance access to culturally responsive texts. This class is also intended to elevate student choice, student voice, and what they're reading. And the second is Speak for Yourself, the Art of Communication. And that will support students with the practical skill of communication, which also includes public speaking, which is a really valuable skill for students to be learning. So no votes required for these proposed electives. We wanted to just make sure that everyone's notified that that's something that's on our radar and in development. The recommended shifts there's no budgetary impact, short or long term, and there are no implications for FTE. But the Building a Better Bookshelf is really designed for grades 10 through 12. It's a 1-semester half-unit class. And students will discuss what it means to be well-read in the context of our time. With the help of the teacher, they will develop a syllabus based on the idea of literary diversity, texts representing a wide range of literary genres, written in a variety of different locations within and outside this country and across historical periods, presenting a diverse set of authors, characters, and experiences. And the second is also designed to be a 1-semester half-unit class. That's Speak for Yourself, the Art of Communication. Also grades 10 through 12. Having the ability to communicate well comes in various forms, whether engaging in dialogue via the comment section of a website, creating a long-form podcast, one commonality remains: the necessity for coherent, cogent presentation. And so students will be studying the art of speaking well, speaking with confidence, and speaking so others listen and want to engage with their ideas. Traditional speeches, TED Talks, podcasts, social media posts, everything will serve as the textbook, and no experience would be required. And I was speaking with Josh Blum about this recently. We were talking about how perfectly dovetails too with the new computer science and digital fluency standards, specifically when we're talking about leaving a footprint and in our digital world, like what you put out there, and anything that's getting taped or anything that you're posting about, that it's really important that people are considering that as well. So.
And Melissa, can I just ask a question? So since these are new, presumably the two that are going away were loved because they'd been around for a while, so people were taking it. So at the end of the year for these, will you do an assessment from the students and find out how they liked it and see if we should continue them going forward? Is that how it normally works for an elective?
Yes, there are a series of elective offerings, and some of it has to do with also student interest and what they're starting to register for. And Luke, correct me if I'm going in the wrong direction with this, but there is a big repertoire. So yes, I agree that we should make sure that we have some sort of assessment, and there is the opportunity to pivot if it's not something that's perceived to be popular. But both of these are widely supported right now by the department, and I believe there's early interest from students too. Like a lot of early interest in very practical application.
Pretty well described as far as course requests are concerned. I also want to say, just because we're not offering video next year, that doesn't mean that we're coming back. We just don't know who we're hiring at this point, and if they have any theater background or skill set. But if we hire someone with a theater background, I can easily see those electives coming back and being rotated back into the mix.
Great.
That's what we do. We kind of rotate things in and out so they stay fresh.
If I could just ask a question, for those kids in the high school who have already signed up for classes, because I know a lot of them have met with their counselors to set their coursework for next year, what is the opportunity for those students to actually be able to register for these classes since they're new, but they've already submitted lists to their counselors?
They've already been put in the course catalog. They were already
Okay.
when scheduling was happening, but if someone's still interested, they can still sign up for it.
Okay.
Just go to see their counselor.
Okay.
Melissa, this is really good. I mean, this is very much needed, and I hope it can continue because literacy, I mean, I think adults even need this kind of, and I like the fact that it's something that would really enrich the students. So I just want to add that piece right here.
Yes, thank you. The first elective, specifically, there's been a lot of conversation between the department and Janice, and also talking about socio-political, socio-cultural worlds that we're living in, and also just making sure that students have the opportunity to read across a wide variety of different genres. And so what does it mean to be well-read, and how do we cultivate that here? And the part that is also incredibly appealing from a student-centered learning environment is that students will also have agency in really researching different types of text, different genres, and actually contribute to the design of the syllabus. And they will be able to self-select certain things they're interested in reading, so that there will be a repertoire that's developed, co-creation with students as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Maureen Carballo?
Yeah, no. So I wasn't going to say anything during my update, as we're going to be presenting an updated budget review later, but I did want to mention one of the items in the business agenda, and it was for an agreement to have Ray Highland, who is a engineer and local person who we've been working with around some stormwater management ideas for Hillside, and this came up partially because of Ida really started the conversation at the village and the school level, where because of that event, after that, both the village and the school are now looking at ways to have a better way to pull some of that excess water off. As we know, not only for the school, but, also the pool and different places were impacted by that water. So we started to work with the village at that time, with some of the trustees, and Ray was working with them, had been working with our architects and engineers throughout this process. We looked at a number of different things, many of which were not possible at the site because there's a lot of rock at Hillside. And some of the initial thinking was ruled out based upon borings, and we had contemplated putting in a porous, like a fire lane, and there were some concerns, and completely made sense about switching that up. There was implications with the fire department, also at the state level. Those are things that have to go through a process. So there now is a feasible option that we've worked through, and as Ray Highland, who had a higher level of expertise in these type of designs and drawings, he had done a lot of the work, and with our engineers and architects got us to a point of what would work at the site. So we do want to propose that we do that work. I think it wasn't something we initially thought. This is not going to be in the bond. This will likely be like a repair, a district repair. We just have to kind of discuss how we want to fund the repair. But the first step is to get the plan, of course. And there is a timeliness that, if possible, and we decide we would like to get it done, it would be better to do it now as we're in construction on the area. It would not impact being able to reopen Hillside, but we believe we'll get better pricing. We will need to go to bid, but as there are a number of civil people on our site right now, we think that if we do time it right, we may end up doing better on the actual work. So I just wanted to highlight that, because that will be something, once the plan is fully developed, that I'll be coming back to with some recommendations for funding. And I do think it is timely, and although not part of the bond, not part of that bond, it can't be, right? It wasn't part of the work. I think IDA's changed a lot, and we do have to consider the impact, beyond our own property, but to the village when there is an event like that, and the need to try to remediate.
Just to be clear,
Sure.
we're talking about using the porous surface on the fire.
Well, these are actually, no, they're creating swells and different drainage that doesn't currently exist. So Hillside in general, because there's so much rock on the site, just even under the softball field, and that's why we have a lot of drainage issues with that softball field, is because of the way it's built, and we've discovered more about it since we've been doing construction, and there's been some digging. There were water issues up there pre-bond, and then of course with Ida, really, and not to say that Ida doesn't happen all the time, but I think when we were there and we were we are expanding the amount of not drainable surface there. So as we were considering that, and although not a requirement, we're not out of compliance. This would be an enhancement. But and again, it started as a conversation that we've been working on a number of things. This is not one of the only items, but things we're looking at FEMA, which is a separate conversation that we're working currently with FEMA at other opportunities that they may be able to help fund, but that's more specifically at Reynolds Field, behind there in the berms, and because that talks about stormwater drainage, because all the stormwater does, it starts at above us at Hillside and then continues down, but it is an important, the timing of this I think is important, and I think it is in our best interest to move forward with having him do this. I spoke to my engineers and architects. They agreed that with his level of expertise in this area, and he had done just, quite frankly, more than half the work, and as just a village volunteer working with them. But now to bring it to full design, which will be required to get any bid numbers on it, we need to have a construction document created for us. So that's what we're approving this evening. Welcome.
Public comment, doesn't seem like there's public for comment. We've got a student report here, no students, but they very diligently did send the report in. I will read it now. This is from Sabine and Gus. Unfortunately, we couldn't be here tonight, but would like to provide some updates as high schoolers look forward to the break week. Many seniors will be spending their spring break traveling to colleges, the college admitted student days, in the hopes It will help them decide on the school they want to attend in the fall. Local scholarships for seniors were due this past Friday. The seniors who submitted applications for scholarships spent a large portion of last week perfecting their submissions. Spring sports teams started having games this past week. Varsity softball is 2-0 so far, and pitcher Katie Cho threw a no-hitter in the season opener against Alexander Hamilton. Sophomore Luna Israel from varsity softball and freshman Jackson Acree from varsity baseball both hit home runs for their respective teams during their games on Thursday. The badminton tournament, that sounds more like my speed, was a lot of fun for those involved. Juniors Luca Forrest and Julian Amsalem won first place prize, and seniors Stella Stevens and Ford Zamore came in second place. There were about 25 teams, each person paid $5, and the money raised is going to Student Union. Student Union recently discussed possible activities for this year's Olympics, which are happening in May, right after AP exams are over. So there's the report. Go ahead. Okay, moving on here. Okay, so we're on to the athletic presentation.
Can I just ask Lou, while we're waiting for Drew to come up, how are the seniors feeling about placements? How are they mentally?
Jeremy, can you give him a mic?
No, you can talk loud. I'm teasing. I know. It'll be
We thought we'd get into some solid schools and are getting a lot of weight. But I believe Jeanette's going to make a presentation at some point. But there's some nervous, anxious things out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've just heard from parents in other towns that it's been a weird year.
It's a weird, every year we call it weird.
Yeah.
It just gets
No, I think
weird.
normal about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been weird is a good word, but we're getting more surprises this year in regular decision than we were in the past. Early action of the decision was really good for us.
Good. Thanks.
So we had asked Drew to come to speak on athletics in general, but also in the last several weeks have been questions about modified, and Drew got incredibly creative and came up with a solution, a pilot, which he'll speak to, but this is about an athletics update for you as a board in general. And just on the question there, we do have on the agenda, and we're going to add in at the end of every meeting a reminder for the board of what the agenda items are coming forward. But we built in something called future steps for this class leaving. So that would be a time once the dust has settled on all this, to understand what this year was in terms of next year for where our students go. But Drew.
Hey everyone, how you doing? I have a tendency to speak fast, so if I go too fast, just tell me to slow down a little bit, please. Thanks for having me tonight. I just did a quick update on the spring athletics. All the registrations that we have, so I broke it down on the bottom. I won't go into each one individually, but we have 20 team sports this year, 11 male, 9 female, and 1 mixed team. We have the total number of student athletes who registered on Family ID was 396. Total number of student athletes currently on rosters is 370. That number went down because some of the students decided not to play, or sometimes cutting on the high school level. Breakdown by student athletes by gender on rosters, 202 boys and 168 girls. So that's just a quick update of what we're dealing with. It's we're really starting to get a lot of numbers and getting it back up, and kids are excited to play. So why is there a need for the revision for the Hastings Modified Interscholastic Athletics Program? I think you all know that. We have a very high interest level in participating in spring modified sports. We had 138 middle school students interested in participating on only 7 teams. Another reason is to provide more opportunity for our student athletes while maintaining the integrity and safety of the program. We want to make sure there's a good coach to athlete ratio. We want to make sure the players get to playing time, and we need to have adequate fields and practice space. All essential. The last one is to stay in tune with our Hastings athletic philosophy. Pretty much we believe that athletics is a valuable component to our student athletes. They learn about self-discipline, teamwork, sportsmanship, accountability, and much more that they use and they take it on for their lifetime. So, it's really important for everyone to play. So here are some of the details. If a team does not have too many players to maintain safety and the integrity of the program, everyone plays without a need for tryouts or cuts. If a team has too many interested participants to maintain the safety and integrity, we will run a tryout process or evaluation process to select the Hastings school team, which will have a full schedule of contests. Roster size is sport-specific and determined by the athletic department and coaches. The tryout process will include skill and knowledge of the game, dedication, effort, attendance, attitude, and sportsmanship. If a student does not make the Hastings school team, the athletic department will offer a developmental school team with a dedicated coach. Practices will be designed to help enhance the student athlete's knowledge and skills to get them game ready. If the coach feels the team is game ready, I will schedule games for them, and we'll get contests against equal competition. And just so you know, players can move. The evaluation process doesn't end after the first day, the first tryout period. It's ongoing throughout the season. They can be moved up and down, back to each other team, depending on, a lot of the stuff, coach's discretion. Some of the potential reasons, moving up, but not limited to attitude, game readiness, attendance, academic performance, and effort. All right, so some of the expectations. The Hastings school team, they practice 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, usually from 3:30 to 5. That's if we don't, we get affected by weather, coach's reason, personal reasons, circumstances. But if you have to miss a practice, you must inform the coach in advance. Playing time and staying on the Hastings school team can be affected by attendance, attitude, effort, and development. The Hastings developmental team will be practicing right now at three days per week, maybe more as we start figuring this all out. That would be Monday through Friday, whatever days that team works with, in the coach's schedule. And that will be depending on field space and coach availability, as well as weather and all those other conditions. Missing the practice for that will affect their development and their ability to come up. And if the entire team up to the coaches feel like they're ready, then I would just add games for them. So that would go the same rules. And if they're missing everything, then their playing time may be affected. Let's see. All right, so how do we determine the size of the roster and which team players are on? Well, the first main concern is safety. We want to make sure that each team has an individual set of rules and safety concerns that we have to worry about. We need to make sure there's a good coach ratio, opportunities for playing time, and adequate space. For instance, baseball and softball, baseball can take more numbers because of the pitch count. They're required to have more pitchers on their roster in order to follow the state mandates. Softball doesn't have that. So their roster is going to be a little bit lower. Sports like lacrosse, you get more players that can play in and out different positions. So that's some of the ways that we determine how many are on that roster. We also determine our coaches' expertise, their comfort level, and the evaluation standards that they set. I helped a lot of the coaches with it, the varsity and JV coaches. We work with the modified coaches to develop the size of roster that they feel comfortable with in order to provide a safe, meaningful athletic experience. Let's see. So during the evaluation process, and we have a lot of the JV and varsity coaches helping out with this to make it a little bit more eyes on, is it easier. They use a rubric that they created, or like a set of skills that apply to each sport individually to determine the readiness of the student. The main thing is we want to make sure that they're not in a game situation to get hurt. So they got to be ready. However, the coaches are looking also at dedication, their effort, the attendance, attitude, and sportsmanship, everything that encompasses a student athlete. So that goes on all year. And I said it here, the evaluation process is going on throughout the entire season. So that way, you're working and you're on the developmental team, you could still get a chance to go up and move up when you're ready. And other people can move down if they're not living up to the expectations that are set. What options do student athletes that do not make the Hastings team and do not want to participate in the developmental school team? They may join another school team as long as the athlete can be fit on the roster safely and with the coach's blessing. I have the student talk to the coaches first. That way they're learning that, if you're going to move a team, you got to let others know. And the coaches should talk to each other as well. Many players in the past have done this, went through it, and found the team that really is set for them. Not everyone's a basketball player, right? We got, some of them were great wrestlers. So a lot of them have actually gone on, played great high school careers, and some have moved on to college. It's part of the goal of this is for you to find your sport that fits for you. If none of that works, then you can join. There's so many outside programs and training sessions that players could attend that they could, get game ready for the next time they want to play for that team. We also offer a morning intramurals program that's for all middle school kids in the morning before school because the space is limited, that they get to play and still get some exercise in. And Mr. ADPHO in the middle school, he runs that. So if anyone needs to do it, just email him. So how can we make this work? We all understand that we can't build more playing space, and we do not have the unlimited budget. So with that being said, I'm able to manage the budget, this current budget that I have, and cover all the additional costs that this may cause this year with my budget without asking for any increases. I have an intramural budget that could cover the cost of the hiring of the coaches. They're going to fill out a timesheet for it, and I'll monitor it, make sure that I don't go over the budget with that. And if I need to, I have other parts of my budget that I could use if needed. But I'm confident that I have enough money in my intramural budget this year to cover it. And also another thing, with few less games and less travel that I've been doing since COVID, since I took over, we have the money that we could cover any additional costs if I have to add games. So we're good with that. Spacing, which is although not ideal, the programs will share space or they practice. They practice together, share place, or I could find another location for them to do some of their skills. If we had a turf, that might help, but, so I had to do a little plug. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm good for a rooftop, that'd be great. Maybe a pool. Since this is a pilot program, we're gonna reassess it at the end of this season and make any modifications that's needed. If it's a success and we want to continue, we'll plan on adding it not to next year's budget because it's a little late in the process. We'll work on it for the next year budget. And I'll tweak it just so we could continue it if it's something that we like. So I had to sneak in some extra stuff to highlight my student athletes and coaches. So this is from the fall and the winter. So right now we have 9 Team Scholar Athlete Award winners. We had 1 regional finalist. We had 1 Section 1 Class C runner-up. We had 5 league champions, 1 NISFA championship participant. 2 school records were broken. 1 1,000-point career point player. And then we also had another one last year, Paige Martin. We had 1 Con Ed Award winner. We had 2 indoor track runners qualifying for nationals. We had 22 varsity and 12 modified wrestlers, which is the most in program history. So that program is on the rise. We have 5 Lowhead Player of the Week nominations, which is a lot. And Josh Thigpen got it twice. And 6 of our Ice Cats, that's our ice hockey team. On that team, they had the best record in history of 15-4-1 since we joined the team. And they won the leagues. We had too many all league honorable mentions, all league, all section honorable mentions, all West, just all state players to list right now. Because I know we got a long time to go, and I'll get booted off the stage. But our athletes are loving it. They're doing great, and they're representing Hastings and making us proud. And the coaches are on the same page. It's educational athletics. We care about developing the entire person, but we like to win, but that's not our major focus. If we teach the right way and the kids are dedicated, then the winning will come. So that's a big thing for us. And I want to thank everyone for always supporting our teams and our coaches and our student athletes. We're all on the same team here for Hastings. So everyone in the community members are all together, and we're trying to make it great for the whole entire community. And to the parents and guardians, you deserve a thank you for the endless time and invested in your child's athletic career. You teach them the importance of sportsmanship, hard work, and dedication, and you really did a lot for your kids to participate in this. You put a lot of time in. So let's go Yellow Jackets. Anyone have any questions?
Drew, I have to say that I recognize that 2 weeks ago I brought this up out of nowhere about the modified sports, and I can't believe how quickly you pivoted. I want to thank you and Jennifer and Bill and all the admin for doing that. I think that I heard from a lot of parents how happy they were. A lot of students felt much more comfortable about doing it, and I'm just so grateful, and I really thank you so much for
I
that.
appreciate that, thank you.
Yeah, I also want to thank you. Actually, the neighborhood kids before I was coming in, that's what made me a little bit late, knocked on my door. Mr. Myers, we have to teach Milo to focus. So and the teamwork you said, it's amazing. Just right, and then they are just working together. It's just amazing, and I just want to thank you.
Great, I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
it
Well,
was-
we couldn't do it without my coaches and all the student athletes, and really everyone that's involved. You guys have been very supportive to the athletic program. The kids are seeing it, like the coaches are seeing it, and they're proud to be Hastings again. We're gonna bring back Hastings as one of the top athletic programs. That's our goal. So, with your help, we could do it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Drew, thank you. To go inside a little bit, Drew is racing around 24/7 the last several days, and on top of that, putting together a PowerPoint that he did not let me review or edit. So well done, sir. Anyway,
Good for you, actually.
well done wearing the green and gold, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I will say, Drew, that the density of the presentation and your ability to move through that with clarity and speed.
Yes.
I got skilled at
Right.
That's what we read last year.
Can I quote you on that? How do you spell it?
Until I leave, you guys will be like, man, he talks too fast.
Yeah, we're all getting coached on our PowerPoint.
You
So-
don't realize you've got a button in your back and we put it at 1.5 speeds. Great, okay, so we move on to budget conversation. I think we get deck up, okay, good. And I'll pass it over to Bill and Maureen.
So I'll start, and I just heard the coaching on how to do a PowerPoint, so. Drew, you don't have to stay through this if you don't want, but your fellow leadership team members do. So, hey, well, listen to this guy, he's amazing. Anyway, so around is coming a hard copy of this. It's also posted, thank you, Melissa D. And what Maureen and I particularly wanted to do, Melissa Szymanski also helped, and we had some feedback along the way, particularly from Lauren Testfa, because there's special ed parts of this. Other members of the leadership team leaned in. This is, I think, your fourth PowerPoint presentation deck. I think, in my mind, that's a good sign of a healthy process with a board. And I'm very used to it being very iterative, interactive from the beginning presentation all the way through to when the board votes. You vote right after we get back from the break, the 19th. So this is a pivotal night for you as a board. We sent to you, and it's now posted publicly on Friday, an FAQ that was based on a set of questions a number of you have been raising with us. Maureen and I looked again at the FAQ today, and we probably needed to edit it a little better because we moved fast on it, but there's some who say write in haste, edit in leisure. So if I had to rewrite it, it'd be written a little tighter for you. I apologize, but we did clean that up a bit in this line. So this presentation is, we want to update the budget for you. It is a lower budget than we presented to you initially. We do want to focus the conversation on that tax level piece as opposed to the allocation piece. That's a very important part of how New York State allows its districts to communicate, and I think that's the focusing on where we need to, which is the Hastings taxpayer. And so we're going to make that very clear. The budget drivers, we need to update that. We will spend some time, and I'll do that on special education in the middle of this, and then we'll bring it back to the district-wide look, which would be some historical looks at budget growth over the last 5 years, some comparative regional growth. I want to caution the board and the community not to look for named districts in there because it's not appropriate, because this is a process of evolution everywhere right now, and we wouldn't want the Hastings numbers in evolution talked about, and similarly we don't want to talk about if I may say, our sister and brother colleague districts at this point. But we can still give you averages in a sense that should help you as a board. And very, very important, and I thank Maureen for this work, and I know she does this every year with you, and it's very difficult to do this, but is looking out over the next 4 or 5 years. Some boards where I've been don't get that analysis. You need that analysis, so thank you, Maureen. So I'm going to hand it over to Maureen now, and when we get down into the SPED arena, I'll get the baton back. So go ahead, Maureen.
Sure. So Bill just kind of walked you through. We presented the budget before. We have a new, just a summary that we'll share with you. I'll just at a high level highlight some of the changes from our last budget proposal that we went through at the last meeting, and then the meeting is broken down about some of these items that we wanted to give you some more detail around and dig a little bit deeper into some of the numbers. There's a section here on SPED as a historical budget, which I think is important as we think about some of the increases that we've had in the last few years, and it gives a little bit more context to those increases. So I'm just going to jump in here because we'll be going through the remainder of those items. So on the last time we were together, we did speak about one, of course, the concern over the overall budget growth, and we've been highlighting each time we presented the budget the main drivers behind that larger increase that we're facing in this upcoming 22-23 budget year. And then we've also had a lot of discussion around the impact to the taxpayers, as those two numbers, the budget to budget number is one has one impact, and then of course what does it actually translate into cost. So at the last time we reviewed this budget overview, we were looking at that time, it was the budget to budget increase was a little bit over 6%, actually it was 6.67%. And with some things that were both, things change between when we initially present our budget. There are some things that would naturally change. So as an example, if you had a child that I'm just using busing, I don't want to keep bringing up busing, but I'll just use it because it's a tangible example.
Maureen,
That
can I
if,
just pause you? What is that noise?
I think it's suggesting
the camera. Is it the camera? Okay,
Oh, sorry.
I want to make sure.
Sure, so just as an example, there are some things that could and do sometimes change from the first time a board sees a proposed budget. Just like as an example, there may be costs that increase over the course of the original proposal, and then there's times in which if there's some updated information we receive, that we could also sometimes make some budget adjustments prior to the board being able to adopt the final budget. We also did do some modifications of, and this is speaking about how do we get our budget down to that 5.9% number. We talked about, within our budget proposal, we do have money set aside for settlements. That's a real number. We can't give you the details behind that number, but I can tell you that the number currently for next year that that we need to budget for based on actual real potential obligations is $1 million. So we do have a reserve. We were splitting that between the reserve and our operational budget. So I think this updated budget overview reflects the fact that we would be fully funding that reserve this year in order to be able to reduce that levy in the budget, because that is an actual obligation that we do have to reserve for. I'm just kind of highlighting some things that we were able to shift around to kind of get to that 5.91 number. There was a change. There actually was a change in an individual student's busing needs for next year that we learned, as well as some tweaks to things such as technology purchases and just overall tightening up of a few of our numbers. So where we are currently on the expenditure side of the budget, we are at that 5.91% budget to budget increase. We'll remind everyone of the main drivers. Then on the revenue side of the budget, we did have some discussions last time. The district does have reserves that are set up, and all of the reserves, for the most part, are set up for a very specific purpose. And we do use them to offset budgets as they are, that's their intended purpose to either pay for obligations, liabilities, and/or as an example with the retirement reserve, that reserve is set up to help districts manage those ups and downs or those increases when the retirement system increases their rates. That would be a time in which you would pull some more money out. That's completely appropriate. It's set up for that purpose. We would absolutely want to do that this year. But we did speak about, would this be a year with a larger budget-to-budget increase, with a larger than the historic last 5 years levy increase? Is this a year in which we bring in a little bit more from reserves, right? We have that. And I think this particular overview, we did think about what the impact of that would be. We have shown a budget that would be increasing our appropriation of appropriated fund balance and to help kind of soften that property tax levy. This current property tax levy, as it's today in this budget overview, is currently about $750,000 below our legal tax cap limit. We accomplished that by two things: lowering some of our items on the expense side, as well as increasing some of those revenue lines to help bring that overall levy down to that 1.2 million. I think, some of the further, when we get through the slide deck, certainly the board, we can discuss the pros and cons of moving more reserve in this year. We may decide that it's in our best interest to kind of look at it at a multi-year process, because the one thing that's really tricky with the tax levy, the tax cap formula, is that even there may be a year in which we think it is in our best interest to levy a little bit less or lower than the tax levy. The issue is that it doesn't allow you to make those adjustments in later years. Even if you decide in one year that you could possibly bring in some revenues, or we have more appropriated fund balance in a given year and we feel, this is the year to kind of offset it, we do have to consider that the following year it starts your tax base at a lower amount. So when we look at our 5-year projections, and at that time in the slide deck, we can kind of look at the impacts of making some of those shifts, because I think it's easier to look at when we discuss that. So just for now, we just wanted to kind of bring you back something that addressed some of those concerns. We can talk further about what that number, what is the right number, how much, or where we want to kind of set ourselves for next year. But this is reflecting kind of some of that thinking. Oh goodness, sorry, I just hit that off. That's not the button.
Do it by memory.
Is it? Oh, sorry. Why is the button? Patrick, I'm sorry, I hit the wrong. No, I'm on. Oh, there we go. Sorry, Melissa. Okay. So again, just a reminder of the budget drivers. This 3.1 million, how does that break out? Percentages are slightly different, as the number it's a part of it is now a little bit lower of a number. So again, contractual salary costs are about $860,000 of the proposed increase. Again, the big new number for us this upcoming year is the new debt associated with the bond, and that is $870,000. And then again, we'll remind you of that increase to the special ed, and again, primarily driven by both out-of-district costs and contractual services, some of which are for Hudson Lab School and our obligation to provide certain services there. So again, that is the main driver of that $550,000. Just again, the remainder, we're not going to go into them here. These are just been adjusted as part of what they represent in the overall budget increase. So they've been adjusted, as I mentioned. This busing increase is a little bit less than it was the previous time we presented the budget, and then what that corresponding percentage of the total is. Here in the SPED, as I mentioned, we want to just kind of give a little bit. I think it's always important, and we'll do that with our overall budget too. It is important to consider the previous years and the out years when you're talking about the budget, because it gives a better context of like our budget growth over a number of years, and some of the reasons that there was that increase. And we did look at this a couple years back, and I think it's an important slide just to kind of get a sense of why, and the reason, I think we've heard some concern about that, the special ed budget has been increasing over, the last several years, and of course that is true, but I think as you look at this budget history, and again, we're really just gonna focus from 15-16 to the present time, if you start at least at the 15-16 school year, and you really just focus on the number of school aid, the number of children that were covered under this particular area of the budget, we had 180 students. And if you look at where our current number is, and that's significant growth. And you can see that, obviously, there was the big jump from 15-16, so there's times in which, it would stand to reason there would be an increase in that budget, because you have a significant increase in the student population that this portion of the budget is serving. So I think, sometimes people say, oh, I remember a couple years ago it goes up, but if you look at that, the number, the overall increase in actually students, I mean, we also are seeing a much higher classification rate. I mean, we do have to, obviously these are data points that we look at also. I mean, they're, that's part of the overall, consideration with this budget, but that is in fact what our current numbers are. So we are seeing that in the beginning, we even though the number was much smaller, the classification rate of our total population was much smaller at 10.3, where we're now seeing, 2 years ago, we were at a 16% classification rate. In addition to that, we are also responsible. This shift, I couldn't get the numbers for CPSE and the years prior to that, but again, it's a good thing just to understand that although these children are not with us, we do have a responsibility to do some of the work, at least administratively, for these students. So there are times over the years, whether we increase some even back office support or clerical support, there is a rationale there, because there was a shift, it may have been around 15-16, where the responsibility shifted really from the county to the school districts to maintain a lot of the CPSE and the evaluations that occur with those children. And then in addition, as we know, in this school year, we're also having the impact of having a private school in the district that we also are responsible for. So sometimes those type of items are not really crystal clear to people, but they're part of this story. They're part of, the increases. So we do think it's important to kind of share this. You do see, we are seeing larger increases overall, and that trend's really started in the 15-16 school year. We are seeing a leveling out of the amount of students. Of course, we know that some of the students, depending on their needs, these numbers can be dramatically different. But again, we did want to share this with you. Again, then this is another slide, and this is just older information that I presented before, but we updated it to include actuals for 2021, and then our estimated end years for 21-22 and our proposed for 22-23. And what this actually does, and in fairness now, a lot of the psychologist time is now being dedicated to building-based services, but the majority of their time, and it is typically, at the state level, they do capture that as part of the special ed budget, although it has its own kind of separate sheet. It is, in fact, considered under that, maintenance of effort towards special education. So as we look at what the actuals are, so this is not just budget, this is what we actually spent, and it also includes the total actually spent for special ed transportation for these students. Of course, we know in the COVID year 2021, some of those costs, especially for transportation, because we weren't transporting for the last 4 months of the year, our costs were a little lower, and I'm not sure why the year before. Oh, those 2 years, they were a bit lower, both of those, and we had some students that were home. And then the other comparison we do is how are we now tracking as a portion of our total budget? And as you can see, the special education portion of the budget is in fact growing and is a larger portion of our total budget. So again, this is important for us. We do need to, we're bringing up because we're recognizing that the special ed portion of the budget has been growing, and as a individual part of the budget and as part of the larger, part of the increases. It's driving a lot of the increases in our budget. So these are things that we're going to be really needing to focus on as we look at those out years now. We've been looking at the past years, now we have to think, we need to be mindful of that as we think about those 5-year projections. Again, a reminder of what our current special education year-to-year driver, and again, this is the budget, and again, this has changed, and as I had just mentioned, part of the way to get this number down was to make the recommendation that we'll use we had some additional funding this year, mostly driven by excess federal funding. We're making a recommendation to fully fund that special education liability reserve to bring it up to the $1 million, which is our current obligations. By doing that, we're able to reduce some of the expenditures in the special education budget for next year. That is still trending right now to be a $600,000 increase at a 7.26% increase of the total portion of special education. And again, just to kind of highlight where the majority of those increases are, about $125,000 has nothing to do with any students in this district. It is a obligation that we need to provide these services for Hudson Lab. I did mention at an earlier budget session that we do have a corresponding revenue, but again, we do have to budget for it. So it is part of the increase there. And then we are seeing an overall increase in our out-of-district tuition costs for next year of about $200,000. And again, our contractual services, which include, we currently have a behavioral list, but if you look at all the different types of services, we have OT, behaviorals, it's an increase in those costs for us. And that's about $200,000 for the district, and the remainder is for salary increases in special ed. And just to highlight there, that is a net increase in salaries for special education, because as we are going to further discuss tonight, there was one teacher that's retiring that we're not replacing in the area of special ed, and it also is a net of 5 less positions as far as teacher assistants. If we don't make those changes, this number would be, in the millions. So, $1 million plus 1.2 million. So this is also a net number with those reductions. Do you want me to take this one, Bill?
You're going to do the assistant
This is
director.
10. Yes, so again, we just wanted to remind you, we did share this information. And this is really a budgetary conversation. There's been some concern that the assistant director is a new cost to the budget, and we just wanted to remind how we were able to take an existing position and what the budget impact of changing that to an assistant director would be, and being that we already have a teacher on assignment, that teacher would return to the classroom, which would then save us. We have another hire we were going to make, so we wouldn't be making that hire. That leaves that particular position vacant and that salary available. We would then use the monies that are currently being paid for that particular position to establish this assistant director. But then also we get some efficiencies because there are some other positions we would not need to fill. As mentioned here, which is the special ed department chair, as well as the ability to use some targeted federal funding, which again, there is federal funding that is specifically targeted for special education, and it allows you for some administrative costs, and we're going to also put this toward this particular position. And by doing all of that, actually, even without really the federal grant money, even without that, it was a $30,000 reduction. So it'll just really be further reduced. But I think we wanted to make sure that we were really comparing it to what we currently have in our budget, and that's where we're getting the $30K reduction off of what the current model is for the way we're using those positions. So if in fact we were to have remained in the model that currently exists, we would then have to add back $30,000, just to be clear on what that means. And then I think we would look to do something differently with those grant monies and see what other ways we could use that. But that is, so that, as we look at the budget, isn't necessarily an increase, it's a change of a position.
Okay,
Do you want to
so-
go there, Bill?
Yeah,
Oh, sorry,
I'll-
I have to change a
No,
phrase, sorry.
yeah, so I'll just call it the slide numbers, then you can
Okay, sure.
advance for me. So Let me hit that really clearly, because there have been some good questions about this large increase in our budget. If we didn't have the assistant director, would that decrease come down? No. Let me say that again, no. Because we actually see we're saving $30,000 by making this move. And I'm going to repeat why it's so important we do go to the assistant director, but let me say, if it was costing us straight up brand new FTE money, as important as it is to add that second assistant director, we would not be recommending it, given the situation. So we will find ways over the next couple of weeks, if the board endorses this, to communicate very, very clearly that we're actually saving money by making this change. Let me go back up, and you don't have to move the slides, but back up in those earlier historical slides, you saw two very important figures. Our classification rate is now up to 15%. We embrace that 15%. We're not apologizing for it. Those are our children. Those are our Hastings children. We embrace that. And anybody who knows special education knows as the incident rate goes up, you have more and more work to do to make sure you're providing the quality services. That's direct work with students, but as we're seeing in districts across the country, frankly, but in the region, is to have special ed work well for individual students, individual staff, you have to manage it very, very well. We have two great leaders, two great managers. And there's a phrase here, very simple, too much work for too few people. But remember that 15% as I go forward. Also remember now that it's up to about 22% of our budget relates to special ed. So that's a significant share that has to be managed and overseen well. So other districts of even a little bit bigger, but have said to manage that well, you have to make sure you have excellent leaders running that area. And you have to have a top team, the superintendent, assistant superintendent, business official, and others, principals who are committed to that work. We're committed to that. We have two great people in those seats, Laura and Tesfa, but remember the 15%, remember that proportion of the budget, and remember from the previous slide, which is linked here, there were 3 pages of detail. 3 pages of detail on the work required to make sure our relationships are excellent with special ed students and families, because when you get the relationships right or close to right, you can then move along all the way through. And at the end of this, as we say here, we want to keep as many students in district as possible. There are students who are best served out of district. I think right now there are too many families going out of district. Too many families. I think there are many more we can have here, but that starts with not just adding a person here for a particular program. It starts first with understanding our full set of work. So that comes to slide 11. Flagged there, the budget presentation from March 7th. This document here that you're looking at is public record. That link is live. You can go in there to study those SPED pages. But I raise up 5 critical things that we want to advance, strengthen the work of our existing director, existing assistant director in those 5 major areas. That if you think back in the presentation of those 3 pages of detailed work, trying to do all that detail plus do these 5 is almost impossible. And for us to move forward as a district to truly serve that 15%, and that percent could grow as we come more and more out of COVID, to serve them as much as possible in district, to manage that significant share of the budget well, we need that additional assistant director. And again, if we weren't doing this at a $30,000 savings, we would not be doing it, which is a bit of a paradox to say it's so important, but in this case, because of the tight budget, we would not do it unless we were saving $30,000. And let me stress, this is about 2 excellent people getting added to and bolstered, in Laura and Tesfa. There's another piece, and then on this slide, there are 2 parts here. There's that addition of the assistant director on slide 11. At the bottom, it's the program review. We talked about that in the original presentation. That's important to build on 2 studies that have been done here in the last 4 or 5 years. Katzenberg's one. Build on that from within, because we have a lot of smart people within, both within the district, families and others, administrators, teachers, staff who can give us guidance on what should be our special ed plan. And our aim is by January or so of the coming school year to bring back to the board at least a draft of what that plan is, to look out over multiple years. Strong hunches in that process, they would say, just for the figures we've given you, the demands, the number of students, the complexity of their needs, a likely recommendation would be you need more management oversight, more administrative oversight before you pick an additional program, be it for dyslexia, be it for behavioral, be it for whatever area you could go into. So that on slide 11, it's emphasizing the assistant director, immediately, but more strategically emphasizing the program review. Going to slide 12. We've had in our existing presentations, the reason I said this is your fourth, in the preceding three, we've had a key line talking about staffing adjustments. We wanted to make it very, very clear to you as a board, the staff and others in the district now know very, very clearly what we're talking about with this adjustment. It's driven for developmental reasons first. It does bring with it significant financial savings, but it's done for developmental reasons first, which I will stress in a second. I want to make clear that ICT we value. We are keeping ICT. Let me repeat that. We are keeping ICT. Because a couple weeks ago, based on the not recommended slide, some teachers saw that the top line in that said ICT is going. And so there were conversations in the district about, oh, you're getting rid of ICT. No, we're not getting rid of ICT. We are, though, for developmental reasons, which are explained here, backing down on the level of teacher assistants in grades 2 through 5 ICT. Simply put, it'd be a pairing, it will be in each grade figuring out how they'll be deployed. There will be one fewer than we've had. Each ICT will still have a full-time SPED teacher, still have the full-time gen ed, but we'll do more of a sharing as it relates to the teacher assistant. This does bring us a $375,000 savings. So several weeks ago, several presentations ago, we had said, and working very closely with Laura and Tessa on the budget, that we worked really, really hard, good creative thinking. Laura, Tessa, Amy in particular, backed up by Mike at Hillside, saying there are some ways that we can developmentally be appropriate in modifying the staffing and bring a savings with it. So go to slide 13. The developmental rationale here for this shift is a basic concept which I have heard myself from special ed parents, which is we need support, but please begin weaning us when it's appropriate from that support. By the time you're in 6th grade in Hastings, you don't have that same extent of teaching assistant TA help. We're going to hold on to it K1, as it says on that slide. We'll review that. We think for that age group, you need that extent of professional attention in the classroom, but from grades 2 to 5, we're willing to back it down. Not eliminate the teacher assistant, back it down. So that's the developmental argument. You go to slide 14, there's a staff deployment argument. We have been finding that the teacher assistants, primarily there for special ed, are doing a fair amount of other work. And there are other ways we can get that work done. You'll see in those sets of bullet points that we, well, I wasn't here, but you all did during the pandemic, it brought in monitors to provide more general supervision. And we will try and get our teacher assistants focused more on the instructional side of that role and less on the general supervision. Now, this will require some creative work by Amy and Mike, particularly Hillside, as to how to cover things, because you can see here, we do have a challenge with at times our staff being out, and we have to cover that, and sometimes that's been the teacher assistants. So we're not saying this will be easy. We're not saying this will be easy, because the teacher assistant role, while there for SPED, has done other general supervision work, and we're saying we need to pull back on that to up the ante, if you will, on the instructional side. This is brought comprehensively to you as a board. I will take all the blame, but a good creative team has come forward with this, and we have been out over the last week talking with members of the district about it. Tomorrow night we'll make it very clear to special ed families in a Zoom that we're doing. We think this is a positive. We think the developmental argument is strong, and I think the fact that it provides us within the special ed realm some savings means that we can protect other core work within the special ed area and otherwise, because you've been working hard on this budget. You know where to find $375,000 would be very difficult. So let me also stress here that even with this adjustment at the bottom of slide 14 in bold, and Maureen put the bold in, is that we still are, we think, ahead of our neighboring districts in the level of staffing ratio, the level of attention by our professionals ratio-wise to our students in our classrooms. So even with this reduction, we feel we're in a very, very strong place, relatively speaking. So I'll give it back to Maureen to go into historical, regional, and then we'll open up for discussions and questions.
Sure. So again, you know, as we've been stressing throughout the budget process, it is always important to look over a number of years to get a good sense of our budget-to-budget increases, our tax rate and tax levy, the impact of those on the tax rate and tax levy. Because as we know for Hastings this year, we already have the debt coming on the books, and then we have a few other larger increases, particularly in the area of special ed, that we are also kind of handling as part of a larger growth in our budget this year. So I think it is always an important practice to kind of look over the last few years, because, you know, of course, if you specifically look at this slide at the 2021 year, where we were really unsure on what the state aid number was going to be, and we really came in with a very trim budget that year. So look, I don't even want to think about that time. Those are the tough budget years. But looking at when you do a year in which you kind of really, you know, either take a lot of reductions and trim that growth, then in the outgoing years, it does become more difficult to kind of maintain those lower numbers. But if you look at Hastings, and again, starting at the 18-19 school year, where we did see an increase in growth, and that was a year in which we implemented some new positions in the district. I believe maybe even hired some psychologists. That may have been the year, but there were some additional positions we did add in that year. And there are some years where you're going to have those higher numbers. So, but looking at the last 4 years and looking at our proposed budget for next year, and again, which does include that debt number, we are still tracking at a little bit below 3% over that time frame. So I think it is always an important practice to kind of consider the last few budget cycles. And again, you know, I'm not going to really highly focus on the tax rate, because as we all know, there's the actual budget that has an impact on that, but there's also the assessed valuation of the town. But if we really then just focus on the right column, so the tax rate column, actually, I would love to focus on it, because that number is really, really a great number. But if we feel more comfortable, you know, focusing on what the actual impact of the tax levy is over that amount of time, we can see that the tax levy has grown about 3.4% over, as an average, over the course of the five years. So just kind of looking at that, and just helps us keep at least this current year a little bit in perspective. And then again, this is something Bill had mentioned before. All of myself included, I do look at we look at what our neighboring districts are doing. It's natural, you know, we all kind of do it. We look at each other's budgets. You know, I speak to a lot of my colleagues in the region on multiple meetings that we have as a group. I think the one thing that I try to do when I'm even looking is, you know, there's times, of course, you can find things that we compare better to or not so well with, but I think it's always important, just like I had shared on the earlier side, we do need to look at both ourselves and others over a longer period of time, because this year we're taking on debt. A previous year, a neighboring district could be taking on debt or have bus purchases. Sometimes districts have in-district busing. They occasionally need to, you know, revamp and buy some more buses. So we want to be very careful and really better understand the details, and then have a better understanding of what those different, you know, different individual cost drivers may be. But that being said, you know, because I was asked this question, I did go back and do that similar analysis and looking some of our neighboring districts. And based upon that, if you look again, as I tried to demonstrate at the earlier slide, over the 5-year period, we are in fact at or below, you know, many of the other districts. And then, but again, and that's not a criticism, or it's just something that they're, you know, depending, we all have years where we need to be a little bit higher for our own particular reasons. So, but again, over the past 4 years, because again, if I didn't use that 4.26 number, we would actually be at a 2.6. And again, that does put us either at or below other districts. So the next slide, and we do look at these, and that's why I printed these out for you, because I know this is almost impossible to view on the screen. This is something that A, we have always done, and B, it is a requirement to have a 5-year expenditure plan. That does not mean you have to adhere to it, but it is important. It's an important tool for people in the community to be looking at, because I think as you make any decision, you know, it's not always about the following year. You need to think about what the impact is on the district over, you know, the out years, because, you know, again, things don't go away, and it's important to understand the relationship between budget growth and your ability to increase that tax levy also. So again, just a reminder, this is not updated to where we actually are at. I actually tweaked it a bit, so we're in and around, if you look at the 22-23 projection. Interestingly enough, although some of the categories change, if you look at previous years, where we're tracking this year is kind of what we thought we were going to be tracking at. That number is actually not, as I looked at last year's budget document, it did put us at that, more or less that 55 million and change budget number for this year. And again, that is in fact where we think we're tracking for this upcoming year. The numbers are slightly different, because again, this is based off an estimated end of year and projecting out. And really, when we're projecting out, we're only looking at information as we know it, right? We don't know what children will be here, like enrollment increases, but we kind of take a snapshot of today, and it's not a perfect, because some things could actually go down too. So there's always a little bit of play in the number, but interestingly enough, although some of the categories shift, the growth does more or less kind of pan out, similar to what we project out. So, in looking at where we see ourselves next year, you know, our current budget reflects a 5.9% increase, again, largely driven on that, or a good portion of it driven on that new debt that's coming on the books. But then as we look out, you know, if we were to continue to track with that additional debt coming on the books, what does that look like over the course of the following few school budgets, without knowing all the individual details of those years? We do use different, what we consider budget estimates to come up with these numbers, of course, some based on a 2%, others in this model, as an example, I'm showing actually special ed leveling out. I'm suggesting in this slide that we would be able to find a way to live within our current special ed number. So that's an example of a number in which we're not, at least for the upcoming budget cycle, showing flat, and then for the out year showing a very small growth factor, not all for the base year, but all for the years going out. Looking at transportation also, I tried to kind of bring that down in the hopes that we'll find more efficiencies there to try to slow the growth in that particular area. Looked at areas such as per pupil allocations, and thinking of that and some of the other, which is, a lot of it is contractual services, and thinking are there ways over the course of time we could either level those things out. But as you look at the out years, you know, our current budget projections are tracking, and these are again budget to budget numbers, at somewhere in that 3 to 4% range, depending on a number of factors. We know that any large increase in health insurance or the retirement systems, you know, that these numbers could tweak a bit. But again, there's different assumptions built into each number. That's why there's that high, medium, low. Years ago, there was a lot more differential between those numbers. They're a little bit tighter now with those different projections or assumptions are. We know that there's always going to be some growth in those numbers, so we do have some numbers built in. But again, as we contemplate tonight's budget, just thinking about, and sometimes there's a desire to add things. I mean, even coming into this budget cycle, there was some possible increases in staffing we were contemplating, but you know, just as an example, this is a flat, actually it's a decreased staffing model that we're presenting. We're down to net 7 FTEs in our proposed budget. And you know, what we're suggesting is that we would not be increasing our FTEs in the coming years either, you know, so this model is just sort of with where we're projecting to be next year. So just to kind of give you some flavor there, but the piece that's really important for us to consider, and not necessarily we have to get into the full detail now, and you can ask questions about this, but about that, you know, that use of reserves and thinking about that tax cap number. And I just want to have you focus there on that 23-24 school year. So for, you know, in the 22-23 school year, the proposed for next year, we have we know we have the allowable caps going up. We can balance our budget. We've made some reductions, some different, we're pulling in some money from reserves, and we're saying, okay, we can balance our budget for next year. But as you look at the out years, based on this model, even with a significant increase in state aid that we anticipate for 23-24, with the growth of our budget still does not, we're still gonna have budget deficits. I think the challenge is with the appropriated fund balance, although we are showing an increase this year, we just have to be careful, because as the budget is tighter and things get tighter, like the amount we'll be able to offset, we'll still be able to offset, but like that does, if we couldn't offset the same amount, that creates another budget, revenue gap, I guess is the right word. So just kind of looking at what the out years, this year, again, we have the larger estimated allowable tax cap rate because of the new debt. Once that new debt is on, whether we took it or not this year, that allowable cap is now based just on that 2% growth. So you can see that next year I'm anticipating our allowable growth for taxes will only be 800,000. That's it. Because we will have building aid coming on, which is a net to the debt service, so it'll actually decrease that a bit, actually. Well, actually, it'll probably work where we'll be under 2% next year because of the formula. So you can see that even with that, you know, we are at the previous slide, just to remind you, even with a lower budget to budget estimate, you're still talking about a $2 million growth. Because we know our budget, our salaries are trending at $1 million year over year. So again, this is just to, I know it's hard to, there's a lot of different numbers here, but it's just to really think about as we deliberate where we think the right final budget is for 22-23, I feel like it's important to share this with you, because that may change your thinking about how much of the reserves we think is in our best interest to use this year. That's why this portion is important just to consider as you're deliberating on that final number. So, yes.
A question?
Sure, of course.
No, I don't have a question.
No,
I type my stuff so that I will be succinct, because I know I talk a lot. But I first want to thank Dr. Makesi, Maureen, and everybody, and I know your team works so hard. I visited your office, and they were all very busy. But I want to first thank the leadership team for the clarity and explicit statements that has added, again, the clarity, which, and I'm saying this for the record to the community members, including myself, that sometimes this added clarity, myself and some community members label as transparency. This clarity has been very helpful. I just want to thank you, the leadership team, for that. I also want to say for the record that I am a faculty member, I'm a teacher, and I'm an administrator at the same time. And I do highly, highly value and cherish public education. And therefore, I cherish all of you here, administrators and teachers, and I'm not mincing words. Anyone who knows me, I say what I want to say without trying to beat about the bush. So I want to say that I totally, totally respect the hard work. I know it firsthand with my own child, and I see it every day. Amy can attest to it. Before I even thought I would join the board. So I really want to openly say and publicly say that I totally, totally cherish your work, and I appreciate all of you. I want to put a disclaimer here because, like I said, I say what I say, and that's how I work. But I want to say that I just want to put this out there that, for example, the last board meeting, when asking questions, it's not in an attempt, it's a way that I'm trying to, like I mentioned, 0% and all of that was to understand. I was trying to understand what these drivers were, and not in any way to assume that there wasn't, it's not appreciating all of you. So I just want to put that out there. I will also add that understanding these cost-saving measures for the assistant directors, because again, I know special ed individuals have spoken through SEPTA, out of SEPTA, and I mean, I have been in a roller coaster with understanding it, and again, I want to thank you for the clarity of bringing it into the surface that this is, and I see it, this is cost saving. This is not the drive, you said it 1,001 times, it's not what is driving all these increases that it was running in the community, and I could not even understand it and call some board members to try to get understanding. So thank you for that. And more importantly, there is a promise to it, which I know some of individuals in the community have spoken about, who are parents of special ed individuals through SEPTA and out of SEPTA. But I like something that you said, which I wish everybody heard it, and I want to echo it, which is the promise of not only this promise comes with a continued trajectory in enriching the programs and all those different things, because you can't just have it in isolation without that framework that would allow it to work effectively. And I know that you can't just put things there without that oversight to let it run. So I just hope that statement that you said, I'm just trying to re-echo it. You know, with that kind of enrichment, that would even allow us to have more students in our districts instead of that money that we are sending outside. So I know that I'm not that good at making statements like that because when I talk to Doreen, like, she summarizes things better. So I like to defer to her a lot. But I will end by saying that I know I want to echo that, I know that each individual person, even all of us as board members, as individuals, all of us, although we may think through things differently and have different ways of thinking of things, I know that each person's heart is a way to support our students in a way that we individually think is useful. And so that kind of passion may drive this dichotomy. But I'm very glad that we are learning to continue our deliberative efforts, which is very comforting to me in particular, for us all to collectively do the best that we can do for our students. I just wanted to end with that, so thank you.
Any other comments from board members, questions?
You know, just reiterating a little bit of what Tamara said, I agree, and thanks, Bill. I know that you guys and Maureen, you did put some of that stuff in the original presentation about SPED, and you know, there was a lot of information, so some of it got a little bit lost. So thank you for reiterating it tonight and helping us to clarify, excuse me, and really understand what's happening. It's not a new position, actually. It's almost like it's a movement of positions, really, and almost like a new title. So super helpful, and I know you said that already last time, but I appreciate you saying it again for us.
Just a couple quick comments in regard to some of the SPED concerns about the position. I did notice in there, you know, the ICT certified teacher is still full-time in the classroom, and that your hope actually stated is that the TAs who are there less time, but the time that they are employed is actually focused more on classwork rather than covering things that need to be covered. So that's actually a hope for better work and more focused work with the students. So those are positive change. That's a positive change in their duties. The other thing I just wanted to remind people, even though the bond is kind of painful when we see it added on to everything else, in the documents that went around a few years ago when our community voted, it was noted how behind we were on spending per student and in spaces for them. Even with this bond, we're still behind in many of those numbers because we hadn't for years sort of kept up with those. So many of the spaces were not up to the mandated size until this bond was accomplished or passed. I remember walking around with a parent who went here, and she said that music auditorium was unusable when she went here. So those spaces are actually coming back to life at a time when we realize how important it is to sometimes have a little distance, but also to allow more places for productions, more places to meet, more places for exercise. I think of at Hillside, being on the PTSA there, and how many conversations about how do we get these kids out when it's 10 degrees, and how do we get them to move? And now there are going to be more spaces for that. And the same here. You're not competing for that high school auditorium. So that's a long way of saying that there are so many benefits coming to our district through that bond. That I think we should be proud of having passed it, and we're going to chip away at it. We are getting money back from the state as it rolls out, and I think a lot of the solutions that people have come up with are trying to stay within our means as best we can. It's tight, but I think we've made some good decisions.
Right. Allison, if I can just add to that too, I think it's important to point out, especially if there's any new parents who are watching this, that in addition to all the additions in the bonds, it was the boiler and the roof. It was like things that needed to get done. It wasn't just like doing fancy things for doing fancy things. There was also like real things that needed to be fixed. And I think it's important that we took care of that before we had a disaster. So, so the bond did like double duty in some ways.
If I can add to also what Allison said, I think a headline for me continues to be that as comparable as this district is to Irvington, number of students, substantial equivalency between what we offer and what they offer, we operate with 25% less budget, $12 million. And, that's sort of to your point about what value that we have to get. And as a small district, that always has to be our choice, is are we getting educational value? The choices we make in building an asset for the students. And in regards to special education, what I like about this plan, is that whole idea of the local internal program review and trying to, having a support structure within special education so that we're spending strategically and we're spending well, where the money spent reaches the people that it helps. And so, even if it's great that this position is actually a reduction budgetarily, but, it's even more important if it allows us to spend wisely, because that's the only way any part of any program we offer ever meets that standard of functioning the same way for 25% less than another district might do it. We have to make smart choices. So I welcome a lot of the stuff that I see in here, and I think that it has sort of the roots that it's the right decision from my point of view.
I think also having Drew give his presentation tonight was really good, because you see that it's sports especially, it's all about the total student. It takes you through life, everything you learn on a team when you're in junior high and high school. It's not just at those 6 years. It's all that teamwork and learning how to manage other people and win and lose well is really important for the rest of your life. So, the academic stuff and the SPED stuff is super important, but it just shows all of the extras that we do are really about the total child, which we all truly believe in. So the fact that you gave that presentation tonight for me just was like, oh my God, this is such an important program for us in general.
It is. Can I just add to that? Is in budgetary terms, back of the envelope, to run one sports team is about 2/1000% of the budget. So you run a second one. I mean, that's what it is, right? So it's a tiny number, and yet, doubling that increases the opportunities for 100%. So it doubles the capacity of the number of students that it touches. So again, when we come back to, it's very easy to focus on a number, 6, 5, whatever it is, but I think our expectation as a board is where we find the value, and something like that. And again, I thank you for the work that you do with that. But there's a lot of we get a lot for what we put into it, and I think that just the community should trust us that that's the way that we look at it, and that's sort of the way that we hope all administrators focus on it, because that's the only way a district this small can function as well, you know?
Yeah, I want to echo the athletic part, that it's not, I know factually that is actually a life skill building. It simply is. Like, we can think of all these sports, but it's literally where kids learn life skills. It's literally where they get their endorphins happening. It's literally where those team efforts. And I personally can account to that. My dad was a military Air Force pilot, and me and my brothers had to form teams in doing things. And it's true. They would, I mean, British colony, we played soccer, right? We call it football. And I was little, they take their shirt off, I take my shirt off too. But that was totally crazy. But sweating and getting the endorphins, yeah. So we may think of it just like athletic, but there is more to it. And especially when it's interest driven, because the students get to choose. Academic way, they don't get to choose. So I know, I mean, I'm not going to bore, and we have a lot of work to do, so
I
sorry.
just want to make sure Sylvia. and
Okay,
Jamie-
sorry, but yeah, I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Yeah, once again, I mean, the presentations are perfect, they're right on, and they're very helpful. I don't think this changes. This is a very tough budget. This is what our community has to do. They have a very simple binary decision. Our community can vote yes or no on a budget. I think the drivers are well explained. We voted for a bond. Like a fixed income mortgage on a house payment, in 2 years that becomes a flat cost that doesn't go up anymore. Maureen, that right there, that line item, it hits 1.95 million on our debt service, and then it's not going to be one of our drivers. I think one of the reasons I ran for the board, I thought I could be a voice to try to support administrators and principals by being hands-off. So when our administration comes to us and says they need more money for special ed, I think the answer from a group of trustees who don't know as much about education as the people we are, watching out for is to just, nod and say yes. They're making a strong case that the inclusion facilitator teacher position should become full-time. Whether the community's a little confused on that is something that, Bill can definitely make a focus and try to let people know. I came on, there was already that administrator position, and I want to continue it, and I can save money by tweaking it. The community members who thought that 2 years ago we shouldn't have added that position might feel like they're losing the same battle they lost 2 years ago. It was added. It was a position that was added 2 years ago. It's not being added this year. Our administrators are saying keep it. So I think that's not our role to push back on it. We obviously don't push back on the bond. And the third driver is that first two lines, the ones that are dark gray there. Benefits and salaries go from 42 million to 44 to 46 to 48 to 50 million. That's a simple 4% increase, rounding here or there. So every year, that's 78% of our budget right there. It's not a confusing line item. Salaries and benefits is 78% of our budget. It goes up by 4% a year. So as a community, you have to decide. Maureen said tax cap number might be under 2% next year. Well, the community can vote for any raise they want. It just can't pass at 51%.
Right.
But if our biggest piece of our budget's going up by 4%, then the community's got to start voting budgets. Do you vote yes on a 4% increased budget when it's mostly funded by tax levy? So this budget's a tough budget. Budget to budget's the right way to do it, and Maureen always does it that way, and we're going up by 3 million. Actual estimate of 52 is going to 56. There's ways you could look at it and say we're going up by 4 million. So I think, the community knows its role. You vote yes or no on the budget, but I continue to push back. I think the trustees have a role in developing the budget. So there's my big hypocrisy. I want to be hands-off to principals, hands-off to administrators. I love the presentations, but I don't want to be hands-off on developing this budget. I do not think our community is looking for a 3 million increase or a 4 million increase. So real simply, I love the bond. I love that it goes flat. Teachers obviously have built-in contracts already with benefits that go up each year. If you go from year 12 to year 13, obviously you go up. It seems to be 2 million each year. And special ed is our administrator's priority. What I push back on is that this board is not developing a budget. Support all 3 of those initiatives. Obviously 2 of them are not flexible. But push back and find and develop a budget that's smaller. This is a budget that Maureen already said has reductions in full-time staffing. So it's not like, you know, you're going to just say, hey, let's, you know, cut back on TAs or let's cut back on aides. It already shows reductions. We have a large debt service, but it's going flat, you know. If you see a problem, you got to address it. And I see a problem, and it's not with this presentation at all. It's, we're estimated to spend 52.1 million this school year, and we're looking to spend 56 million next year. I don't see how a community votes yes on a budget like that. Whether we use reserves to call it a 2.7% levy, or if we hit the full tax cap at 4%, I don't know where our community comes at. And Damaris is, you know, always saying we're here for the students, and Doug always says you don't represent any, you don't represent the people that got you here, you're supposed to represent it. Sure, there were neighbors who stopped in my driveway and they yell out the one line, do something about the taxes. And I always give them some awkward thumbs up. But, you know, I don't see a 3 million or 4 million increase being easy. I love that we have the reserves to try to use some money to keep it from being it, but it's still a 6% budget change. And that's too big. But, you know, I would develop a different budget, and that's, I believe, the role of these trustees. More so than the community. The community just has a binary decision, and in that regard, I have to say thank you. I think Maureen and Bill and the whole team, this is a tweak of the previous proposal, and I think it's a tweak in the right direction. I think using reserves might be the right solution to spread the pain out. I think it's a tweak in some of the line items that maybe can be thinned out because we're getting higher aid. You know, we have budget transfers coming up to vote for, $200,000 budget transfers out of a certain line item. Maybe we can pull the next year's down, and clearly you guys found $400,000 in other ways. I think it's still a budget that is just too many yeses. So yeah, yes to the bond, yes to obviously salaries and benefits, and yes to special ed. It is more than our moral obligation. It helps every student. Whenever you slow down in the classroom and add more support, every student benefits. So it's too many yeses. Always, yes to the admin, your priorities I support. Yes to the bond, but then you got to find some no's, and there's got to be more cuts because we can't be spending 3 million, 4 million more than the year before without throwing out some real adult contractions.
So
and
Jeremy,
Maureen already says it. We got FTE reductions, so I've said where I would do it before. It's the same items. You know, it's class sizes for me as a suggestion. It is changing our budget transportation items. It's changing the priorities on outside consulting for teacher development, bringing it inside. you know, finding ways to save money, because next year's budget, we're gonna be, you know, seeing a no vote, either that year or this year, whether it's 40% or 51%, but it's not gonna be 60% very easily. Yeah, Maureen, I mean, that's more than my time to speak.
Jeremy, I have
Hold on a second, hold on a second.
Sylvia hasn't even talked.
Sylvia,
Okay.
do you
Well,
want to
I'm
say?
sorry that I missed everybody's comments while I stepped out for a moment, but I just wanted to say that I think, you know, there's something to be said for the fact that we are a high-performing district, and retaining that status requires investment. So, from my perspective, you know, when we talk about the bond, we did that, as people have spoken to, for the fact that we didn't have space to accommodate and meet student and program needs. The community approved that bond, and now we have to pay for it. That's about a third of the increases that we're seeing in the rate that's going to be coming to us next year. I think that's a fully justifiable expense. From my perspective, when we say that we have services that we need to deliver to our special ed population, that's an obligation. It's something that we need to do to maximize the potential of all of our students. If this is the best way that the folks who actually work with said students say we can achieve that, I'm going to support that. The other drivers that are up there, as everybody's spoken to, are not really anything that we have any way of, I think, impinging upon. So I'm not going to shower you all with a lot of words. I'm going to basically just say that from my perspective, I don't know what we can do if we live in a community that, for example, wants to make our, you know, athletic programs, our modified programs more robust. When people say that they want us to meet these needs, all those needs require money, and that's the reality of it. Everybody wants to have the best things that we can afford to offer to our student population. And I don't have a quarrel with that, but that's a reality. When we say we want to have the most music offerings, the most artistic offerings, the most athletic offerings, that is a laundry list that we have to pay eventually. So I give all the credit in the world to all of our administrators, to the teachers, you know, for really bringing it home to our students all the time, but it costs money. So we can't just keep on saying that when the community comes at us and says, well, why are you just, you know, why are the bills racking up? Because realistically, when in the previous 2 years, we have taken things away, we brought them back. Why? Because there's such an outcry for when things are taken away. So in the same way, if we're now saying that we're going to pilot this program, I would imagine, given how great our staff is, that everybody's going to think that's terrific. But when we don't have the money to be able to manage that based on just on our intramural budget, and we do have to build it into the budget 2 years from now, that's what's happening. You know, so I'm willing to take that heat, but we have to understand every time that we say this is important, this is a priority, we're adding to that. And that's just a reality. And, you know, I'm not going to make an excuse for that or try to, you know, dress it up. It is what it is. And I wish that it were another way. I wish we had a broader commercial base where we could, you know, kind of spread out some of this pain, but we don't. And so long as we want to maintain the status so that we do have, you know, the appropriate offerings for our student population, this is the way that it is. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, well, I first want to thank, first of all, the board for all your comments, which are helpful, and everyone's in different places. And I really want to thank the administration and Maureen and Melissa and Bill for putting this together. I think that the level of clarity and really the level of conviction that you have for the budget you put together is, I think, board members can agree or disagree with it, but I think that it speaks volumes to the level of critical thought that you've put into how we get from where we are to places we want to go. And you know, we haven't spoken really at all about this idea of doing a portrait of a learner work. And you know, the reality is this town hasn't done, we'll see, you know, I know a lot of people can question a planning process, portrait of a learner, is it going to be valuable, is it going to work, how valuable, is it going to be just a lot of people talking? But when it comes down to it, it's hard to set priorities as a community, right? That's a very hard thing to do. And so I commend the administration for really taking on that work and setting, some of those priorities. And, I think that when we think about long-term budget growth, we have to think about what can be sustainably pulled out and left out of the budget. And, Jeremy brings up a couple that are targets for that. Class size, transportation, they can be pulled out and left out. But once you pull something out, you set a new benchmark. You set a new mark, and then you still have the same percentage budget growth the following year. So it doesn't. The game doesn't just kind of change as soon as we yank stuff out of the budget. And so I think, one of the things I've been very sensitive to since I've been on the board is that, they always say you add something to a budget and it's that now it's, it was a gift the first year and then it's an expectation the next year. So be very careful what you add. And it's the same thing with cutting. You can't just kind of take it out and put it back really easily. These are programs. We heard from people during COVID, my kid's been waiting, 4 years since 8th grade to take that class that now you're thinking about cutting, which was it was, an AP honors class. It was something that, we have got kids that look forward to very special classes, in this district. And people move here because of that. I mean, there's something, and I would agree, Sylvia, with what you said. There's something about, the specialness of this district, really looking after the kids, really looking after some of these programs. And, to Jeremy's point, these programs cost money. And there's some things we don't have. We don't have a robotics program. There's just things we could do that would cost money. And if we put a robotics program in, you better believe 3 years from now it'd be a hell of a hard time to get it out of here. So, we have to be really careful about what we put in and what we take out also. It's a hard set of things to do. I'm motivated by the 3-year numbers that you have in this budget, quite frankly. Yes, this 1 year is high. We've got all the things I won't go through that we've all read through. But, we've got years where we were negative. We've got years. We live in a world right now where you don't have the ability to keep a budget flat and put it 6% the next year on kind of a tax cap perspective. We could do that 20 years ago. You can't do that anymore. And so it's a very tricky process to manage this budget. And I want to publicly commend you, Maureen, for the work you've done. We read horror stories in LoHUD and different places of districts that get themselves in the hot water. They cut too close to the bone, and then they can't figure out how to get out of it, and it ends up with decisions that some board members like class size might be comfortable with, but other community members aren't. But when you're faced with those tough decisions, and you want to see this place get nasty, that's when it's going to start getting nasty. You've done an excellent job over the years, so I just want to publicly thank you for that.
Really true.
So just a kind of a final thought on that is, I think where we want to leave here is we want to give guidance to the administration on how they want to look at this. And, and so that's where I think we should kind of move next, if there's some specific guidance, because next board meeting we come back and there's a vote. Right? So we're not
I
going to
have a
change
question,
it.
so.
Yeah, so let's go to questions and maybe some different advice that the board wants to give the administration.
Okay, so this is based on listening to Jeremy. I would say that I respect Jeremy's input a lot. He has a financial background. He knows what he's talking about. But I have two direct questions for Sylvia and you, Doug, because you mentioned two things. And I might have missed that, and I'm not asking this to be answered right now. But you keep mentioning about programs. I am all about programs. Most of you have heard me say that. I dislike it when it's being shortchanged because I feel like it impacts our students directly. So my direct question is, when Jeremy is talking about the 3 million increase, I am not clear, and I don't want the answer right now. This can be another time. But I don't seem to be clear on the programs that this 3 million is. So far as I'm concerned, the programs, we are saving money. But this 3 million increase, if you are saying that it's when we have to cut programs and it's serving specific programs, I'm not sure what programs, what are these new programs that, like, the math is not working correctly in my head, because I'm trying to figure out that he's talking about a 3 million increase, and then the default is that it means we are going to cut programs. Is it because new programs are being added that is costing that 3 million? I'm not sure, but again, this is just in my head and it may not mean anything. The second, I don't know what to call it, whether it's a question. It's also a question. I know there's a finance committee, and Jeremy, you are part of it, so that's what I wanted to ask you directly when you had finished speaking. Is there a way that you can work through, again, I don't know nothing, and I would, when it comes to finance, you have a rich background, you've worked in that, and so you know the numbers, and you are actually a mathematician as well. So is there a way that you can talk through these processes within the subcommittee? I don't know if it's something you do in the finance committee.
We try to talk about it in the finance committee, but the big item was the budget, which kept getting presented, publicly in this whole meeting here. But definitely what Sylvia said, the 6% increase is driven by a bond, which we already voted for, which has a lot of benefits. And I did want to point out that goes flat, like, changing from a small house to a big house. It hurts the first 2 years. Marine has it accelerating for 2 years and goes flat. And I think the other driver is special ed, which Melissa and Bill have said is a priority need that they've identified. Maybe Marine has it flat a little bit generously there at 1%. I think a lot of our costs tend to go up at 4%, but if you support your administrators that you hire, A, because they know more than us, and B, because you chose to hire them because you thought they were awesome, that's not a financial game where you get to play, and you don't have as much control on those first two items as you might pretend you do. I'm a year 8 teacher, and I get a raise next year, no matter what. I get my year 9 step up. So financially, what I was maybe trying to get to is that it's 6% this year. It's likely to be 4% next year. But what I wasn't seeing was what you were saying. I don't see cuts to any programs in this budget. There's cuts maybe to the amount of aides in classrooms, and we don't consider that a program. So what you and Doug are talking about, yeah, if you don't prioritize the students. I really liked what Alex said 2 weeks ago. Jeremy, if you cut transportation, well, you're just putting it back on the residents, and if that's something we already prioritize, he sort of pushed back on it. He's like, I think that is something that we have, So I don't see a lot of cuts to, Sylvia was talking about other years where they were painful and we put them back in. There's usually not a lot of cuts when you see a budget going up by $3.5 million. Budget to budget's $3 million, actual to budget's $4 million. So, I don't see a lot of this board wanting to get. Sometimes we get too overly active, when we speak where we don't know. If we're trusting the department, then we're forcing the community to vote on it. And it is, I don't know what you want to hear, is 6% more this year. Some of it's sticky and will never go away. Some of it we never had a choice about anyway. So I don't see any cuts enough to offset the extreme specialness of this budget. The biggest budget increases before this were in the low 2s. And Maureen and Bill and Melissa have tweaked this to bring it down to the low 3s. That's just a new number. If you let the community vote, they know even less of the details than we do. I don't know where it falls.
Can I just say,
Just to be clear about, when we see programs, the real cost is just staff. That's the cost. The program itself isn't the cost, it's the staff. So,
But if specials went down by one person, I think a year ago, we were
Yeah.
almost taking a a music teacher away. I think that's, Damaris, that's a cut to the program
Right.
in that you'd have 1 or 2 less classes that could be offered, whether it would be 5th grade band or 6th grade chorus, and a cut to the program in language is, they could be small nips, or that's not the word.
Point out something, just like a couple weeks ago, we talked about how a lot of things that look like cuts are actually cost shifts. Like, you could get rid of the massive efficiency of busing kids and have people drive here. All of us who drive can imagine what that would look like, the 45-minute round trip in Hastings. I mean, it's like a massive inefficiency. The idea also, what's the opportunity cost of a cut? And that's when I brought up what the actual, in budgetary terms, what a sports program costs, how little it is, and how many people it reaches. When you take things away, and it doesn't mean you have to offer everybody every choice, but I think there are educationally recognized pathways that different students move along. And I think all of us as parents, and certainly all teachers and administrators, know that kids move along different pathways. And when you take things away, it's an opportunity cost to that child. And I point to my wife from Brazil. In public schooling in Brazil, there are no sports programs at all. So who plays sports? It's mostly the people that can afford to go to private clubs and enjoy those sports. And those things, those kids that never get the chance to do those things. And it's sort of like a different version of a displaced cost. It's a cost that they'll never pay, and an opportunity they'll never get. And oh, by the way, it's also not like a fungible thing. As adults, we can say, well, we're not going to take the trip this year, we'll go next year, or in a couple of years. And like Doug mentioned, kids are only in a grade once. They only have modified for 2 years. They only do a play a certain year. I mean, their opportunities are much more than adults. Their opportunities are much more closely linked to their time and how old they are. And developmentally, those are, uniquely intertwined. So, I think we just have an ethical and moral obligation, to support the breadth of pathways, not necessarily the depth, not every choice for everybody, bless you. But, there's a certain, bless you, there's a certain breadth that we just have an obligation as a whole piece. Because when we cut off a piece of it, we're cutting off opportunities that affect some kids quite immensely. So I would be, it's hard for me, and I agree with you, when I first came on the board, I was interested in what the drivers of the cost increases were, and, whether sort of low-hanging fruit, but it's a very hard case to make that there is any of that, and it's an even harder case to make that when you make those moves, that you're not just shifting the costs of the burden onto, to the same people we're trying to help, so.
To Alex's point, coming out of a pandemic as well, when kids weren't able to participate in so many different activities that we have, is this really the time that when we can finally get them back on track that we want to get rid of something? I mean, we've seen the social emotional results. I don't think now is the time to make it even worse for kids to not have the things that they need.
Yep. No, just last thing, I don't see any cuts to programs, so I'm not advocating cuts to programs, and I think our community loves our art, music, drama program as much as we love the sport program. I think our community loves the AP course offerings, whether they're small size or not in the high school, and our community is strong supporters of an obligation to special ed. So definitely don't want it to feel like, no one's talking cuts to theater, drama, art, photography, music, sports. The cuts I've mentioned, I feel, are in other areas. And no one's expecting a cut to busing of first graders back home at 3:30. A lot of people don't have a way to come to school and pick up their kid at 3:30. But there's other areas. It's just a red flag to me. When you see a $4 million increase or a $3 million increase, you could either throw it to the community to vote for it, and that might hurt, not this year, but next year. I think we don't get ever to 60% easily votes. Or you see the red flag and you just, you you gotta take a bitter pill. And the bitter pill is, in this community, never gonna come out of the arts or music or sports, because we're a small town that supports diverse ways to learn, the way Drew said it. You know, you don't just learn math in this school district, you learn leadership and accountability and excellence, and you do that from the plays and the concerts and the sports, and occasionally from a math teacher, but more likely from other areas.
So Jeremy, can I ask you a question, like a real question? When you say that you feel that the trustees need to get more involved in the budget, does that look like to you, like having a working session where the trustees go over line by line and figure out what can be cut and, you know, what can't? I just want to know what, I'm open to that, you know.
Yeah, well,
I just
before
want
I
to know what,
respond, you know.
like, what the options, I don't know what my options would be for that, so I'm curious.
Yeah, I won't respond now, but, because, you know, that's 5 times that I've spoken already tonight. You know, there's other people might want to change it, but,
I can just put one thought on that. So Bill and I just, I think this week had a brief conversation about that, which is, you know, what could that look like, right? Like how, I certainly think, you know, the board going through 600 some odd line items is unproductive for a lot of reasons. But, you know, I think the question on the table is how can the board get more involved? That might be listening to the public earlier. It could be inviting the, you know, different hearings or ways to engage the public or earlier in the process. I know something Jeremy has spoken about is, you know, can we start working early in the fall on getting a number that we feel comfortable with as a growth number? You know, and some of it might be just advisory and directional, but then, you know, different things pop up and it's not going to work. But, you know, can we think about that a little bit more? But I think as far as developing a budget goes, and getting to a number that is lower and more manageable, like you quickly realize there's like only 4 or 5 real places that you can do that with, right? So you get 600 some line items and you like realize, okay, it's these 4 or 5 things and they're all really unattractive for a variety of reasons. So it really becomes about, I think when Jeremy's saying it, I don't want to speak for him, but what he's saying is like, where are the places, if we were going to do it, what's the number? We want to get really clear on like what that would mean, and then we want to give to the administration without guidance and just saying, here's where we're going to come in, we know it's going to be tough, here's, you know, let us know what you're thinking. So there's no kind of magical way with like pixie dust that it becomes a fun process. It's a pretty nasty process. And some districts get their hands forced there, and you know, what I think would be very helpful, Maureen, is if you could just walk us through the contingency process, like how that works. And I don't think the board members might really understand how the voting and the contingency works.
Right, so what we're talking about this year, we're not in a tax cap override situation, right? So we are below the cap. So I'll first speak about, you know, the
Maureen, can I just pause
Yes.
for 1 second?
Sure.
Do you want to say something?
Leadership team, I think you've done your job.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks, guys.
You can stay.
Luke said he wants to stay.
You can stay and enjoy our scintillating conversation.
Stream it live as you drive home.
Before you guys leave, you each have to tell us one thing to cut. I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
Drive safely.
Right.
Half the Kansas lineup, cut them.
So,
Yeah,
Yeah,
So-
Bill, thank you for that. It's always tough looking at those faces.
how about my face?
They need to go home at some point.
So in this particular budget cycle, we're not looking for a tax override. So, which means that as long as your district is tax compliant, it only requires just one vote over, like, you know, 51%. Like, it does not require a supermajority. If in fact, say, just like playing it out this year, if for some reason the budget were to go down, we'll say for this year, We would then have an opportunity to bring back a revised budget, again, well, one of the things we would have to have a better understanding of why it went down. And I guess based upon, my guess would be if it were to go down, it would not be shifting reserves, it would be making reductions. I think that's pretty clear, right? Because we are proposing something that's lower, so if there was a concern, I think we would then be either looking to make some recommendations on what we would need to reduce. I mean, it would be cuts at that point to get that number down. And then coupled with, we would want probably to have many meetings to kind of make sure that people fully understand what's at stake, and then put another budget up for vote. If that budget were to fail again, just making this up, I mean, if that were to happen, then we, in a contingent budget situation, you're not allowed to levy one more dollar than you did the year before. So in our current proposal that we talked about tonight, that would mean that $1.2 million worth of the levy would either have to come from reductions, or you would have to, I mean, there is a scenario where you just take all the money out, we're just gonna take, we're gonna take it out of the reserves, and we're just gonna do this, for this year. I think we all know that either of those scenarios is good, and then that following year, you would be definitely gutting, you'd be gutting like $2 million at least, if not more, from your budget in that scenario. So I think if it were to go down, we would attempt to go back out with a revised budget. And again, we would need to get a good understanding of why it failed, I guess, in order to produce something that we would hope that would pass. So my guess would be if it went down, it would be purely on the expenditure side of the budget, because I think that's where we would have to make the reductions, because anything else would be like a one-off, and that's not going to help us. So we would need to likely propose some significant reductions. And I guess if we got to that place, we would have to very quickly kind of reconvene and figure out what that would look like. Because I think we would have to have a good understanding of what we believe is going to be that number.
And I think that's helpful, Doug, the way you said it. Any discussion of, this budget or contingency is missing that point, and any discussion of supermajority, is off by a year or 2 years, or maybe never. But, this budget either comes to the board and we ask for changes, or it goes to the community and they can support it. And then there is the chance for a second budget that is not contingency that the community could vote on again. Doreen, you asked a little directly, what would I propose? I feel like I've been trying to say this, since February, that budget season gets late early. And at this point, it's late, If Maureen doesn't have a staff of 500 that can go through.
But it's even beyond that. I mean, I think I honestly do start the budget process. We start rolling things over in September, October.
Oh, yeah.
Part of the issue is that, I send out the budget materials in October to the building level. It takes them about a month and a half to compile what they need in terms of like programmatic,
Yep.
pieces. The special ed, it'll probably change by next week because it's student-based, right? So they don't have all the meetings done for next year. So again, when people say, oh, you had money either left over in special ed, well, they have to project out based upon some unknowns at one point. And there are times that there's some students, sometimes you get criticized, well, you didn't spend that money in the tuition line. Well, they were able to keep the student in district. That's what happens. I can assure you that every line item in that special ed budget, and Bill knows, all of us know that, but we even did this exercise last week again. We go through and it's like student by student by student, it's not just like, we're just gonna throw some numbers there. It is a very complex budget, special ed. It just is.
Yep, but it does get late, by April, it's late. It's not the time
it's hard. It's really.
it's not the time in April to, ever think that we're the people looking at the line items. But, in February and March, board didn't have a feel for a raw number. We didn't say, we didn't say, limit yourself to the largest increase from before, keep it at 2.1 million. And if we had, they might have come back and said, with the bond increase, that's absurd. you know, but we didn't say it in March either. And we said, show us what you got. And I think we're rolling a little bit too much onto the residents. And I think we're giving them a binary choice, whereas we have a very flexible team. We've seen it in Bill and Melissa and Maureen. Calendar change, it was flexible. They found a new way. Modified sports, they found a new way. You know, we have avoided so much of the national curriculum discussions that might be misguided. You know, we found a new way with a leadership team. So when we give a binary choice to the residents, it's they don't have anything, but they do. There's one budget that they could struggle with. If not, they would see a second budget. And if not, then we go to contingency. And even in contingency, Maureen discusses, there's a lot of flexibility. We have reserves, and we have ways to spread out the pain. But, you know, I think there's ways to do it this year to respect our residents. You know, we're not here just for the students. We're here for our community, and our community has families that no longer have students in the building, and our community has families that never had children, and our communities are not a simple median income earner. We have communities that cannot budget easily for 4% increases or 6% increases, and these are very hard choices that everyone knows about already.
I want to say something. So I know, Jeremy, I know factually that apart from as the Board of Trustees hiring superintendent, financial oversight is one of the things that is our mandate, and we all took the training on it. So I'm circling back to the financial committee part.
Okay.
The reason why I'm doing that is that I believe that I don't think that we should shelve the 600 line item. Like, we chose to be, to do this volunteer work. And so if it's, I mean, you've gone through it. You said you went through it, it's arduous and all of that. I say this only to say that sometimes it's helpful to give that second eye of benchmarking. You keep talking about BAS, and right, it's just that other eye. And I personally don't think that we may need to create a work session. I think that it should occur. I trust your expertise, and I think that it should occur within the financial committee, those line by line items that if maybe Doreen, where did she go? If Doreen wants to sit in, you know, a board member can go into that committee, so that we don't create another work session if they are interested in going through those. You are interested in that, to see how you can help with the blind spots or anything. And you may see that there's nothing, it's bare bone. And then that way we are bold enough to let the committee know that, you know, with our district, with all the things that we want to do for our kids, this is really bare bone. But it sounds like this nebulosity of possibility of saving here. Mm-hmm. And I know that, I mean, from my little understanding, I know that they've done what they think, but there may be more, and which I believe you're alluding to. I would say this as an example. I went through, my budget is not 56 million for sure. And I know I have colleagues in this community in CUNY, so they would attest to this, but that I had to work directly with. But I have gone through line by line budgets that COVID, when we did not have money, I was able to somehow get money to get students free program, online program that would have cost them money for them to be able to do their online labs. Only because I salvage by going line by line. So I don't think we should table that if other board members may be interested. But I think that they can go to the financial committee instead of us creating another work session, because that is basically a work session in itself. So so that we don't sort of throw it away, kinda. That's what I'll say.
Is there any direction that we want to give to the administration? I know you said there's a couple of small things that you're just going to tweak. Obviously, you'll have some small changes before we get to next week. There's just different small things you're still working on. But As far as advisory to the administration as they go away, come back next week with a budget, is there anything?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things.
Maybe
So
requests that you
we
have.
do need to finalize, you do have to adopt it, but part of the issues, we have to also create our budget newsletter. So I do need some sort of direction, like, because I think we won't be able to make that legal a requirement. So I think the question, I guess, yes, two questions. So are we changing the expenditure side? Is the board requesting us to reduce the expenditure side of the budget is one question I have. And the second then would be, if that's a no, what are you comfortable with raising the levy, not leaving the a full $700,000 on the table, and considering tweaking that number a bit up? And again, as much as I know we have the reserves, but back to that point, like, it is a good amount, but there is a strategy in trying to use it, especially with the opportunity to raise the levy a bit. I just wanted everyone to consider whether we should leave that much on the table. That would be my only question. I presented it as we discussed, and that's fine also. And if that's the direction, we'll work within what we're allowed to work in. So if that's the direction, it's fine. It is fine. I do want to just say that, we do go through line by line the budget, and there are many different pieces to it, and it is a bit different because you are talking about a public school district, which is a little bit different than it just is. It's a very different model, and the kids' needs are different, and they're more complex, and we have kids coming and going all the time. So we can't just say, we do need to be, it is different, and it's not always. There are lines we go through, and there are some things in this upcoming budget that are going to be non-recurring costs, such as currently still it does, we do have the money in for both the portrait of the graduate and also some of that work we know we need to do with the architects. Those are some things we did have to, I think I did mention it when I went through the line by line budget. Some of our increase on our expenditures are really not increases, but I think I mentioned that the trips have to now be budgeted, or the co-curricular trips.
And then they show in
It's like $1
revenue.
million, but to be honest with you, it's like $200,000 or $300,000 worth of the cost is gonna be non-recurring the following year, just kind of things that had to be front-loaded into the budget. So also
And the
just-
Hudson Lab one, up
And the Hudson Lab,
100,000 in
yeah.
expenses, but
Right.
up
And
100,000
actually,
in revenue.
Right, and there's some, and I don't, because I don't want to identify children, but they do have a very high needs child there right now. And that we are able to build back the district, so there are some, although it's showing on the expenditure side of the budget, there's about like $450,000 of just those few things that I mentioned that we would not have had to add. So like, you have to kind of, we need to be really clear on what was the driver of that 3.1 million. And I know it is going up significantly. I just want to be, I don't want anyone to think that we don't look at it, constantly. And I don't have blind spots when it comes to the budget. I just want to be clear, because I think there are
I'm gonna
people watching,
underscore you
and I
said-
want
yeah,
people
I
to
mean-
understand that. I spend 60 hours a week looking at this stuff.
Yeah,
It's not as though there's not a lot of oversight,
Yeah,
to
yeah,
suggest
I
there's not.
mean, a
is
couple
not
things. I
fair.
mean, the community, and I know the
Yeah,
board knows this,
that's,
the community has to really understand that there's incredible scrutiny on the budget. I think the multi-year look here, New York State, thank goodness you require that. Some states and years don't require that, so you as a board have a tool that others don't. One thing Doug and I did talk about, but it has to be a board decision, not necessarily tonight, is I have watched boards, because you have to work as a board on a budget. I would urge you not to divide up into subsets on a budget, because at the end of the day, you got to vote together and you have to have equal information. And committee structures tend to look at oversight and management of the budget along the way once approved, not the development of the budget. Because otherwise, you'll get in some really bad places fast. So I think that I would suggest, especially with the tool that the state requires, but Maureen has built out so well, I'm pointing at that, which is still over there, the multi-year budget, is you could start very early in the fall, looking at that, understanding, we're still not quite ready yet with the administration, but you could be in a discussion about where might we see lower growth? Can we get there? And then earlier get some sense if you can. But I would say the following, I think I would encourage the board to take a multi-year look, support this budget, get behind this budget. We will get behind it. We can message even better than we have. We've been learning as we go a bit on this, what the messages matter, and get your help on that. And then our commitment is working with you as early as you want, into the early fall, as to what's the next year budget going to mean, and how do we make it easier for some of you who are very respectfully raising, very good questions about the level. Because there's not a person here, from those who left or who work here, that don't know this is a large increase. And want to do everything you can to keep the increases lower. But to not endorse this budget, given where we are as a district, a village, where we are with the demands, the growth in costs, the COVID-19 demands on our students, it would be very, very difficult. We would have to make some decisions you just don't want us to make in terms of class sizes, things like that.
I'll go first as far as Maureen's 2 questions. Thank you for that, Bill. Obviously, 5.9 is a high number for the reasons discussed. I'm okay with that. So personally, I'm okay with that. The tax levy, I think tax cap, because of the bond, is somewhere around 4.1 or something like that, right? That's where the cap is right now. And, I'm always sensitive to the fact that the way that the New York State system is set up, you set a baseline every year. And so I'm hesitant to meet that budgetary need we've set to, I don't want to go to the cap. I'm also hesitant to not leave too much on the table just because it puts us in a financial challenging position in subsequent years. So I'd be more comfortable probably with like something in the low 3s, I don't know, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4, something like that, which still doesn't give us a full tax cap, but also it doesn't hamstring us in subsequent years. So that's what I'd be comfortable with personally.
Are we just going around?
Sure.
I feel very much the same. I don't want to drain the reserves to an extent that puts us in a bind for subsequent years, or lower the tax cap so much that it hamstrings us in subsequent years. So I would agree with something in the low 3s. It seems to make sense.
I'm just going to say I concur. I agree that the using of the reserves makes me nervous for many different reasons. And regarding the tax cap, I don't think I don't want to give a number. I don't think I understand it as much as I would like to get my head around it in order to give my opinion on it.
Well, I think you nailed it, Maureen. 2 ideas. I think we should hit the full reserve tax cap. I think if you're asking for transparency, the amount of time our residents look at it, I think it's not misleading. I don't want to say that, but having increase of 6% and then, having the possible bumper sticker that we're at a 3% tax levy is misleading, in that sooner or later we're going to pay for it. So I would, for transparency, I think we should let the residents see this is a 4.1% tax levy. And beyond that, maybe we're getting some extra money from the state, and maybe we're getting some extra money from last year's rollover, and that we're proposing a budget. Bill was asking us, to support this one. I would, Maureen said, I would propose a number. I've been trying to get a number, lower expenses is what I would hope to see. And this is $4 million more than we spent this school year. So in that sense, I'm going to be a no on this budget. And I'd like the residents to see it as a full reserve, full tax cap, 4.1%. And let's see what the community's values are. Damaris and I have said a lot of times, 5149 is a tough way to run a community. and 55-45 is just as challenging. So if you were asking, I'm clearly not concurring. I would say show me another $400,000 out of this budget so our community can vote yes or no, and let the community vote at a full tax cap. Let them know what they're voting for, and they're voting for increased spending, partly because of an awesome bond, partly because of priorities in special ed, partly because of teacher salaries, and partly because of a lot of other items. As to what Maureen said, I definitely don't want to go into 600 items. I believe that's their job, and I think they do it well already. I think the trustees give guidance, and we do not dig in areas where we don't know. And we don't know most of those line items, as well as obviously our admin does. I like those two questions. Thank you, Maureen.
I'll go next. I support the budget, the current number. And with regards to the tax levy, I'm sort of between Doug and Jeremy. My only real thought is that there is, too much use of reserve. I'm comfortable going above, where we're at with, with that, for sure. Whatever you would think was correct.
I don't know much about the budget. That's not my area of strength, so a lot of it is talking to experts, which in this case is a leadership team who are looking at it. The reason I mentioned the line item is the working session that Doreen was talking about, to get, again, my thing is thorough, bare bone, and then there's that clarity, and like you just mentioned, the community sees clarity as transparent, and that's sometimes when the word transparency gets thrown about. So I mean, I know this is not as voting, but I respect Jeremy's expertise because he's worked in financial sector. I don't. The little I do is nothing close to 56 million, and for me to be able to say I know what I'm talking about. But I personally respect his input, and I want to just give him that credence and expertise that he brings to the table as a board of trustees. So I'll just end it there. That way I don't know what to say. That's all I'll say. But I will support the collective board when they vote. I will not. If the collective board votes, I'll be a team player, I promise.
Okay, do you feel like you have guidance that you need?
Yes, I do. I just want to say one final thought on the budget, and I'm not going to bring up more statistics. I had mentioned last week, I mean, when we talk about budget numbers and trying to get a sense on spending, and one of the items I had mentioned, I think at the last session, is we talked about like historical per pupil costs. I mean, there are ways that when you look at budgets, like in this particular area, the cost of running a school is similar, right? Because the cost closer to New York City, the regional cost is much higher. I think that is a good indicator, like of when you're looking at per pupil spending. Because I think if you look at a budget number just with no other context, it is hard sometimes, because I know I'm asked, like, how do we rank, or how do we compare with our colleagues? I mean, so looking at an individual's budget to budget number in 1 year is not a good indication of like how do we spend our money in comparison to others. So just as an example, and this has been pretty much where Hastings has been our per pupil cost. It is currently, and it has been always in the median of the county. So that means that where there are some high, and I won't even put those numbers out there because the like districts like Botanical Hills tend to run at a much higher per pupil cost than some of those that are like the K-8 districts. But currently we are at a median in all of those districts and what they do is they really just take your budget and they look at your enrollments and they back out debt service and some of those things, because that if somebody had really high debt service, it would be a harder comparison. I mean, they look at it in a few ways. Sometimes they roll it in, but it's better to typically pull it out to get a better like instructional cost perspective. So I think just to kind of remind, for everyone's sake, when look at our spending, we look at what we spend to educate students in this area, we are in the median, you know, and when as an example, this year it's 32,688,000, and there's districts that are to be honest with you, over $100,000 in the area, but those are like the outliers, but then there's a lot that are in the 40s and 50s, and then the third quartile is 36,000, and then the low is 25,000, and those tend to be like the larger districts that get you know, obviously just the scale of the numbers is a bit different. But I think just as we look at our budget, I think we can't lose sight of what the cost per pupil in the region is, because I think without that, how do you know whether your budget is the right number? That to me is like again, it's not the only measure. It doesn't mean that we always have to spend the same as others, but to think that we should be spending substantially less doesn't make a lot of sense either, right? Because that's how, at the end of the day, it is still a business, and there are still like a cost of doing business in this area for the number of customers that we have that it costs to do business. So I think we do have a lot of data that we both report and we are able to look at. It doesn't look at your budget either. It actually looks at what you actually spend, which is also important. So you can say, well, if your budget's higher, no, it's actually what we spend based upon state reporting. So I just wanted to mention that. And then the other thing on the 5-year projection, I won't bring this into it tonight, but the other thing we do have to be mindful of, and this is not for this year's budget, but this is part of the work we're going to be doing we'll hope to be doing with our space utilization. In the next few years, we may potentially have more students coming to this district, so we will need to start really grappling with that. You know, my understanding is in addition to the Greenberg Graham, somebody actually told me this, I wasn't aware, but they're also developing other places on Walburton across the Riverview property that is now being developed also. So currently, my understanding is we're looking at upward of 200 new units coming online in the next 3 years. So I think this 5-year budget presentation, once we have a better understanding of that, I think it is going to be extremely important to understand those long-term costs. I mean, just to I just wanted to throw that out there. So that's why spending the money, which I would maybe be comfortable with putting off on some of the work we're doing, is critically important, because we need to understand what the impact is on the schools. So.
Thank you, Maureen.
Welcome.
Thank you. Super helpful. Okay, so let's keep moving. So 7A, business items. Does anyone have any questions about 1 through 15 in the business items?
I have a question, I'm sorry to say. Number 6 and 7, I just wanted to inquire about the paint color, why that needed to be changed.
Let me see.
They were tied together. One was
Yes.
an increase, one was a decrease, but
Okay,
it had to be
so-
a customized color for the walls, so I was just
Yeah,
trying to figure out.
so this is actually for the middle school auditorium, and it has to do with the sound panels. So
Yeah.
initially, the design, the colors that would match in, if we wanted to kind of match it in with the decor, the standard colors were not working. We actually had we had some allowance we had contingency in the project, and quite frankly, putting up those sound panels and not the custom color would have been wrong. But then what we ended up doing is we ended up putting some more of the gray and custom color in. So it was initially an increase, and then when we decided to kind of go with changing it a bit, it ended up being a little bit more cost effective.
So it's like a middle of the road
Yes.
kind of compromise.
Correct,
Okay.
because I think we always knew there was going to be a little bit of a change order based upon when we decided to kind of incorporate, once we got past the part of the construction that we knew that we had no unforeseen issues, and we had money still in that contingency of that particular project, we're now allowing it to be used for this change order to make sure that the sound panels we're putting up match the intended.
But it wasn't
design.
just there was a swatch and you guys were like, oh my God, I didn't realize that was chartreuse, I wanted ruby. You know?
No. It was that the colors, when they were doing the color match, and the company actually said that, certain of the panels, some of the colors we were selecting would have been come under an upcharge.
Okay.
So then we had to increase that, but then we ended up making a couple tweaks down to some of the custom colors too.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? on
Yeah, I'd
business
like to, item number 14 is budget transfers. It's 2 budget transfers of a total of $200,000 coming out of instruction. It's an area that we've been conservative in the past and had budget transfers out of So I see, budget transfers coming out of instruction and maybe going to equipment leases for laptops. Is that sort of related to what we've never really discussed? Like, do we want to continue pandemic level remote instruction that's based on laptops and based on computers? It seems like we're making that decision in a budget transfer here that we want to continue spending so much money on computers, even though they're dead in 2 years, 3 years. Is that what this is sort of related to? And not the security one
Yeah,
that's
the
related
security
to
one
it.
was related to when they came and did an assessment. There
Yeah,
was
that one
aspects
obviously
that we
supported.
sort of decided to that we didn't want to wait, and it was just related to the lockout and some of the technology we didn't have on the exterior of the building that our security consultants really need this. So we're making that recommendation to kind of get that work done. The laptops are really related to, partially, it's really laptops, not Chromebooks, that with the closing down of a lot of the labs for space, we did need to buy some additional cards for some of these more highly specialized programs. Then in addition, when we did the state testing last week, we had to accommodate, and we had to use these other kind of Chromebooks, and some of them you are required to do them on laptops, and where we had banks of, when we had the computer labs, it allowed us more flexibility to let kids go in there and be on the desktops. Now we're finding, because we had to recapture that space, we've had to there's been a cost in technology in having better laptops, not just, the Chromebooks don't suit every need. So part of that was really a scramble last, right? It was like a scramble last week with the state testing.
We got information
Late.
We got information late, and it was related to pairing what we already knew about student accommodations and some discoveries around programs that weren't running on certain devices to be able to do that well for children. So there was some quick shuffling to make sure that took place.
And then part of that also was, and we were kind of ordering a little bit more than that need would have been, because they were able to kind of pull some people's laptops. But again, as the space is more important to us than having the computer lab. Computer labs are more efficient, from a technology standpoint, but not efficient in terms of the space. So because of that, we've had to deploy a couple more laptop cards, and then we realized we didn't really even have enough to kind of really, so that's related to that. So those were things that, because we hadn't really contemplated doing that next year as part of our
We had to
technology
throw it in.
spending, we were we have to kind of get it done, just to kind of have it. So that's the thinking there. And then the
other one
thing-
has the word security in it, so
Yeah,
I don't want
yeah.
to touch that.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, yeah, that was just,
What I would question, and not question you, but question for me, if we've been very consistent and very conservative, and we've been able to be flexible, and that line item is one of the ones where a lot of our transfers come out of that line. If a budget had $400,000 less from that item, which typically has $500,000 of flexibility, in that scenario, hypothetically, we could still be doing this unforeseen expense, but we would be voting to use a reserve fund for it, right?
Yep.
If we had
Not a reserve, unappropriated fund balance.
it would, one of the types of reserves that aren't limited, right, unappropriated fund balance
Yeah, it
from
wouldn't be a
the,
reserve, it would be unappropriated.
from the previous year.
Yeah. Mhm.
Right, so you would be able to have these votes of, hey, something came up, we need another 100 grand. But in our current budgets, it's almost always, we have the flexibility to find it, usually in a couple line items, but it's not a recurring one where we're just going to be, well, we have a technology budget that has already been recommended by the admin. Okay. I would be correct, though, that we would have other ways to vote on that in a year where we didn't have unforeseen extra.
I would say that, but this would not, I think in that scenario, we probably would have went without the security upgrades as much, well, I shouldn't say that. I think it would be much more difficult because it has to come from the.
It has to come from a specific.
It has to come from that 4% unappropriated fund balance. If it's not for one of those other set up reserve items, because the other ones, like the liability, are set up for legal costs and for settlement costs and litigation. It's really, like, the other ones are set up for the particular purpose in which they were established. The board can liquidate it out into a budget as we do to offset things, but I couldn't say, hey, we're doing security cameras, let's take out the retirement reserve, like, we wouldn't be allowed
No,
to
it can't
do
come out of
that.
tax centauri, it
Right.
can't come out of.
It's only that unappropriated fund balance, and I will say that schools, interestingly enough, I kind of learned this last year, I'm not talking to our Rivertown neighbors, but legal limit is 4%. A lot of districts in Westchester keep up to 7 and 8%. They don't even care if they get, like, the
Caught,
written in.
if they don't get the slap.
slap from the, because they said it's our prerogative. So the fact we keep 4, it would be really difficult to ever touch that. Because that's like our really rainy day fund.
That's our really flexible,
Really.
it's flexible rainy day too.
It is, but it would be something like, as an example, yes, we just did the infrastructure, but if you did have an expense that was significant, we would just be really super duper careful.
And by 4%, the numbers are, we have usually around $2 million.
Correct.
In an appropriated balance.
Yes.
That we choose how much to throw towards
Correct.
each year's budget. And if the budget comes in at conservatively,
We budget.
well-managed, tight, and consistent,
Mhm.
is I think important, not when you just hear extra, then it tends to stay at around 4%. Or we could choose to fund it to get it up to 4.
Right, but again, I think.
Thank you.
Okay, I just also want to mention one idea though around this, and I get it because I know when I first started working in schools, I was like, but you don't run I mean, obviously we budget what we budget, and thankfully, and it could actually go in the other direction possibly. Most schools, and occasionally they do have years where they cut it close to the bone and then they're like having another type of issue. It's not unusual to have some money left over, right? Like you establish whatever your budget is for a business, having 2% or 3% left over in your spending plan at the end of the year, it wouldn't be like, so it's not like 20%. It's a reasonable amount, and I think that's, part of it is we wouldn't have the reserves if we didn't ever have money left over. And every school district has reserves, so every school district has money left over.
The flexibility of
But every school district,
well-planned
including the
budgets.
state, you know what I mean? The state of New York has some of the best reserves, so, so I think this idea that like we would ever have a budget that didn't have money left over.
And then
would be a
going
good-
to the appropriated balance is not typical.
I think it would be hard, I mean, I think it's difficult because I appreciate what you're saying, you don't want to ever feel like you're quote unquote overtaxing people. That's certainly, there's a fine balance in that. You don't want to have too much. And there are times for a variety of reasons, like as I mentioned, and I can tell you, like, people may say, well, what happened? Like I said, we prepare for staff, and those staff go out on a parental leave of absence, and their replacements are significantly cheaper. You're going to save money in that scenario. That's how you generate those dollars. It's not, much of it is, quite frankly, I don't know if luck is the right word, but,
But sometimes-
fortunate things that help
happenstance.
save money.
Sometimes they go out and you pay for a leave replacement while you're still paying them as well.
Yeah, no, that happens too, which is the opposite.
More
of what we don't
recent.
like. Yeah,
with
so
the
you kind of
pandemic.
have I'm just using or I'm thinking of somebody were out for the full year, said I'm gonna take a leave of absence and their replacement was less expensive, or, there's scenarios in which that's how those dollars are generated. And then when they're there and we feel we have an expense that would either have to be budgeted next year or could be paid for now or could be put into a reserve, we then use those opportunities to save those dollars for future needs, right? Like that's how everyone gets the reserves. So like
No.
like every district has reserves, and that's how that money comes from. It's by having additional money left in line.
And a plan to build up for your rainy day fund. I mean, it's part of the budget plan is to have
Yeah.
reserve. And thank you for explaining that transfers.
Thanks.
I have a
Just to be clear on, like, you can never budget for reserves. You can't put that in a budget. You can't tax for reserves.
No, and I think that's why, I think when you create your budget, like, I mean, I don't want to keep belaboring the point, because I know it feels like, I'm not trying to be defensive, but I'm
Well,
just saying like
can I-
how subjective numbers
Well,
can be.
what I might say though is, I think we're getting into kind of like, the point that Jeremy's raising, we're talking about is like philosophical approach to budgeting. Like it's, where's the comfort level we have in getting close to the bone? Because there's pros and cons, I think it's hard, and I think I would put this into the fall of 2022 planning work when we talk about a variety of these 4, 5, or 6 big areas where the money can come from. and what's the philosophical approach? And Maureen can share, the philosophical approach she's taken. Board members can learn more, weigh in more, because we're really getting into a philosophy conversation here, quite frankly, and I think we could go in a lot of different directions.
We could avoid that.
Debate it for a long time. So let me go back to numbers 1 through 15 on the business items.
Yeah, I have a question about number 8, the Brown coach. What is that for?
So, yeah, that's the 8th grade trip.
The 8th grade trip, okay.
So,
It just seems so high, they can't have regular school
It's like
buses?
$40 a kid to send kids everywhere.
Is that what
Yeah, it's-
average price?
It's the whole grade at 5,000.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
and we did try to get the regular buses, but then this is what they did want for the 8th grade trip.
It makes every school trip tough. It starts off at 40 right away.
That's why we don't have a lot of field trips.
Yeah.
Because buses.
Right, the bathroom with the digital, I mean, the TVs and.
Yeah.
Okay.
So moved.
Motion to approve business items 7A 1 through 15.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Do you have a motion to approve 7B, the placement services for CSE and CPSC?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Anybody have any questions about personnel, A or B? Do I have a motion to approve personnel items under 8AB? A second?
Second.
All in favor? Anybody have questions about minutes from 3:21? Motion to approve minutes from 3:21?
So moved.
And second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay. Policy, 3 policies for a first read?
These are fairly straightforward. I'll just hit them quickly. Starting with, there were 2 policies that were recommended for rescission. These were principals for school board members and superintendent board of education relations. These are basically philosophical statements, and we pretty quickly agreed that they weren't really policy, so they were just sort of an easy choice for rescinding. Policy 2210 sort of detailed.
Rescinding and moving, we're gonna figure out where to move them.
Right. Oh, I'm sorry. The idea was that we would potentially move the philosophical ideas into a different, or a different document, but not policy. Policy 2210 details the annual organization meeting. It's sort of boilerplate, but I think we came to an agreement that it was sort of an important store of like institutional knowledge that, just to remember, it's sort of like a large checklist. It was important, even though it's not quite policy, it's very, very useful. So we decided to leave that, just revised with some, for clarity, points from the attorney. And policy 8505, charging school meals and prohibiting and shaming, those are some revisions. There's been an issue in the actual functioning of the charging program where the district is accruing a huge amount of debt, a fair amount of that's not been recoverable. And so this was some tweaks to the parameters of how charging works, not affecting any student directly, but just, on the sort of the back end, to try and give the administration some tools to make it function better. If that's a fair characterization.
Yes, part of it's about shaming, but then the other part is that the kids just go over. It has nothing to do with not having the funds. They just go over and the parents don't pay it. So how do we recoup that money?
For how many people is that an issue, would you say, Maureen, roughly?
Hundreds.
Hundreds.
Yeah, we're sending out hundreds
was-
of letters. It's
I think it was
$18,000 this month.
$18,000, yeah.
This month?
But that's not new just to this month.
Yeah,
That's
it's
what-
built over for the last couple months,
Yeah.
but
That's
it's like
not
a
a monthly
rolling
number.
average.
Right.
Hundreds.
Yeah.
But also, that debt, the debt is not, it's not recoverable in the same, because we're a school district, as you explained, we can't, we can't actually function as a debt collector and go
Right.
get it, we just ask
Right,
for
right,
it.
right, right.
And there's been problems, not just, there's some problems just with funding, just things falling into arrears, but there's a larger, not a smaller dollar amount, but a more significant problem of simply unrecoverable money, and in the tens of thousands of dollars, so.
And I
Right,
think
so we'll
it's,
have to write that if we don't collect it.
Right, because there's no enforcement
Yeah, but it
mechanism. You could
takes
just
a-
nudge.
No, but it actually
Right.
takes a tremendous, I mean, which is fine, that is actually, is becoming a big time suck too, because the requirement of the policy was that we would be, every time someone hit $10, I was like, we'd be sending out 500 letters a week, you know what I mean, of, yeah,
I
so-
asked if
so
we
it
could
just-
refuse to
yeah.
give, like, the graduation, like the diplomas until people paid, like they
That's
do
the
in
idea of
college.
shame- that's
but
the idea of the
you can't, but
shaming,
you
right?
can't, but you can't,
That's
right?
the shaming part.
shaming.
Right, well, I think it's not the shaming, I
No,
think
no,
is
no, I
if people who
agree.
can't like afford it, and
Right,
that's a
right.
totally different sub. These are people who can afford it, but just don't pay it, and I'd love to see the PTSA somehow get involved with just helping to remind parents that this, here we are talking about the budget, and there's $18,000 that we're paying that we don't have, you know, I think it's important.
So I want to say that I know that during the policy meeting, we clearly understood that there is reduced lunch that people get and qualify for, that kind of eligibility. I would, however, and so this payment is not necessarily those that
No, not at all.
qualify. So we just want to state that and be clear. It's
Yes.
not because
This is not people who are having financial difficulties.
Yes,
These are people who
but-
just have forgotten to pay.
But this is what I would say, we would, again, being that I'm also serving on the Youth Council Board, I know there has been a phenomenal increase.
correct.
And people may feel ashamed to actually say that, you know, it's nobody's business to know their difficulty. We've seen it on Facebook, people asking for sanitary pads. So this is
Yeah.
not older folks that are in this kind of hardship for us to keep the food pantry going. So I would say that if there is community members that for some reason are having that kind of financial difficulty that is causing them not to pay, there is this reduced process. So and there are processes that it's not, no one will know, there's no shaming about it, and the school is here to support. Maureen made it clear how they, and I know factually she goes beyond with all her workers to support our children, and it came up in the policy meeting, and I want to be clear that this is not we trying to support you knocking the heads of the disadvantaged, financially disadvantaged individuals in our community chasing you for debt collectors' money. But those that are forgetting, those that can help support and they are forgetting, this is something that needs to be done. And
It sounds
sorry,
like,
Maureen, you wanted to say something, so.
No, I mean, I think we tried to kind of look and try to get a better understanding, and even with the guidance, so we have people who are strictly, we're throwing out free and reduced lunch, they apply, or they're either on the program or they're new to the program, that works, you know, seamlessly. Then occasionally there'll be students that we call administrative referral, like, so we think that the family may be experiencing some difficulties, or we get a sense of that from either the students or guidance counselors, and then I'm allowed to create a referral for that student and give them that option. And it is extremely, everything is very discreet, because whether you're full pay or not, the fact we use the PIN code, it's pretty, like, you know, you wouldn't be able to tell. But I do think some of it may be that families are either not necessarily in that situation, because the problem though with the free and reduced lunch is the criteria to be eligible is very low. We can occasionally put somebody on for an administrative assignment, but I have to justify why I did it, that, I don't know, you could be we may know, like, your family has medical bills or something else, something that would allow us, because you're not going to be able to qualify based on your income, right? So it's not that simple. Then there are probably people that just are falling behind and they needed to go into arrears, and we do try to be sensitive, and even when people reach out to us, I'll go in and just change their limit. I mean, maybe I should, but like, we do that, so like, we try to adjust it, so if you said, oh my God, I can't even make the $100, now I'm like, oh great, I don't want your child now, it'll, you know what I mean, it may stop the sale, so then we go in and adjust it, but I think.
But the technology does do that?
Yeah.
Because it sounds like the technology doesn't refuse the sale.
Well, if you put the $100, we have a limit, we raise it.
But there's no, the technology isn't like if you're negative, you can't go above
Well, but-
$5 for that day.
Well, no, we have to put a limit in, so we usually put a $100 limit for all students, and then we raise it to 200 because people were going above the 100 and not paying within the 30-day period.
That means they can spend 100 in a month.
2 now.
But how are the families notified that like
They
their
get a
child is
letter.
delinquent? Okay.
Because mine just automatically renews.
Yeah, like that's how I
And
have it, you have an automatic.
My
limit.
students are all free lunch and reduced lunch. It sounds like there's a technology loop that might be low-hanging fruit, but it more like grabs our attention and we should back away from it. You know, we're not a cash system, because then people who are getting the free reduced lunch are walking around with a scarlet card. So we are, everybody has a PIN, but the PIN doesn't know your balance. The PIN lets you go negative for the month.
But does the trigger hit like when you go below 0? In
No,
terms of being like-
it just keeps letting you,
Yeah.
instead of it being.
I'm just wondering when it is that people get the letter.
But why not
because
have-
I'm thinking I was a delinquent at one point in time.
No,
My
no,
kids.
no, we're not
And I
saying
remember
everyone
going
gets
to
a
your,
letter.
no, I'm saying it. I'm
No,
like, went to your
everyone
office
gets
and
letters.
cut a
People give
$40
you
check. I
$5,
did.
but
No,
I'm
last
saying
month I was negative.
Yeah.
If your
But
credit
that's what
card
I'm saying,
expires,
but-
it lets you go negative.
Right, exactly.
But it could
And
have
so-
also just put the kids' limits at -5.
Right, that what I'm wondering.
Why not
is just-
-5 if the parents haven't done auto renew?
Right,
Because then
I
the
had
kid
not.
gets stopped in the cafeteria.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
It's not shaming if our families with free and reduced already have it. It's,
Right. It's like for me, like I didn't
It's a
know if my
type of
kid was
shaming, and
$40
it's
in the
a-
hole, you know?
But that,
And then I
the
just
policy
looked it
even
up.
speaks to people who are full pay getting shamed.
Yeah.
Right.
And what happens is that they still need to record the sale, because if they are unable to put in the system, which it wouldn't allow you to do it without the higher negative, we need to capture that sale to be able to get the money back from the parents.
So in other words, parents that can pay should pay on
That-
time.
I'm just wondering
Yeah.
how they know.
And it's, well,
That's what-
here's
That's
the,
our
I was
policy.
in this situation, so
Right.
this
So
is,
was
this
I.
was a separate issue from the policy, but just something we discussed that I think we should discuss at some other point.
Right.
Is that, you know, like, we open up, like, we got this, my kid enters 5th grade, I've never had food before, I don't know what's happening.
right,
I have no visibility to what anything costs. Next thing I know, 3 weeks into school, she spent $200. I'm like, what the hell just happened, you know? And I get this letter. So we had talked in the meeting about trying to figure out how we can better communicate as a
Exactly.
separate issue.
That's
How
my
much
point.
things
Yes, that's
cost,
what I'm
how much
saying.
you should pay for a day, how to help your kid budget, da-da-da-da-da.
Right,
Because I think that that's an important part, too.
Right, because that all opens up once you get
The
to FMS,
communication
when
and
you have a
engagement
cafeteria.
are going to
Totally,
be on
it's
it, don't
completely
worry.
different. So now Eliana only pays with cash. We only give my kids cash. She's not allowed to use the card because of that, because we don't know how much anything costs.
Right.
So that's a way to control
Yeah,
the
that
funds,
was one of
but
the
we'd like to
pieces
figure
we
out
talked
another way to
about.
do it.
Felt we needed to do a better job, because I do think you can spend a lot of money upstairs.
Yeah.
relative-
And we're adding Hillside to it.
Yeah.
So right now, it's 180 kids that are behind by $100, and that's only from our 8th grades. So 180 out of, out of 1,200, it's,
We talked about the communication and engagement, finding a way to better communicate.
Yeah.
Like Sylvia is saying, right? If, you don't know, you don't know. It's not because you don't want to pay. So
Yeah.
how do we communicate effectively?
But-
That's a different conversation.
But nobody's a typical family, but I would have been fine with my kid getting rejected. And then he would have come home and said, Dad, update your damn credit card. I had nothing for lunch, and I think the negative number could be higher, but
Tell them that's what it
my
takes.
parenting strategy is not popular compared to Doug's family.
Let's move it along.
Right, moving on, yep.
Okay, so that's the first read. We'll come back to the second read. School calendar.
I have a question about the school calendar. So it's required in the teacher's contract, if we don't use them all, that we have to give 1 day back, right? Or are we gonna eventually have to give 2 days back?
We have to give back whatever is left unused.
So right now, we used 4 out of the 6, so there are 2 left. So if we don't use those other 2, we have to give back 2 dates.
Was that a 1-year, was
That
that
was-
in the 1-year rollover contract? Because that's
Right.
not the,
That's not permanent.
I thought we were talking about if we had less than 2 days unused, we were considering an adjustment. So I don't understand that, because I see we've used 4 out of 6, and I don't remember a discussion where we talked about if we use 4 out of 6, we were giving back days from parents. if you're going away, go away. So Maureen can, or Bill or Melissa, was that in our one-year rollover contract that we would look at it? Did we promise it?
No, we approved it.
And it's that they get
the days back.
they get all 6 days. And that's not in the contract, that's the 3-year thing. That was in a addendum, one-year rollover? And that ends with this contract?
Doesn't sunset.
That doesn't sunset?
I have to go look, it may.
Because I don't remember that
Let me
discussion.
just, I don't
Yeah.
want, let's.
I remember having a
I'll
big
find out
discussion about it, but
now,
where
but-
we.
I know we had a discussion.
And we
And I
had it
thought
set
we
at a lot less than 4.
We discussed with you, and there were a lot of concerns raised, and
Yeah.
we said, given the contractual obligations, this was the only option we had this go-around.
But I thought
So-
we had discussed in the meeting, Bill, taking off not the Friday before Memorial Day, but taking off from the end of school.
Well,
It will likely be, it could end up being both, because we still have 2 left, and if we don't have inclement weather days between now and the end of the year, we're feeling like for tonight, we're in a place weather-wise and time-wise where it makes sense to do the one that's connected with Memorial Day weekend, because a lot of families are away that
Right, they're
weekend
gone
anyway,
anyway.
just to get ahead of that for planning purposes. And then revisit the other one early May in discussion about where that would best be suited.
I don't remember this discussion.
We were in the
The
little
teachers
room
have
together.
a,
We did.
right,
We
but
didn't
we
make any
said
decision.
so that was this year. Our school district has never given back days prior to this year. Thank you, that's what I wanted to be clear on.
But I just want to also say that was actually agreed to, and that was part of the reason we had to do it. It was actually.
I don't think it was 4, though.
No, but there was, the reason we had to move forward with it was actually, there was an agreement that was signed in,
At the end of last year.
at the end of last year.
Right.
Right, before the interim
Correct,
superintendent.
Correct.
Well, okay,
That was
before.
part of the one-year
Yes,
rollover
yes,
at 1 1/4,
Yes.
that unused
Correct.
days.
It was just that we had to like finish
Right,
up the
in that
language,
case,
but-
then I don't think it's gonna be, I think it does sunset, because that was there were a lot of things that
Did
we were
We
specific.
voted on something.
No, you voted on a side letter in
Right, but
public session.
would it be possible for us just to go back, because I have some, I'll be honest right now, I don't have a full recollection. I remember we went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and then we voted on something, and I can't remember where we were back or forth when we voted on it.
We could
So-
go right to April 2021 right here.
We were fourth, and I don't even remember what fourth was. So, it's probably just because there's so many other things, right? Is this gonna screw us up too much if we vote on this next time, or?
No, that's fine,
From
but
a
I think we wanted to
communications-
put it on, because also we would want to tell families if it was gonna extend the Memorial Day weekend. The
But-
last day, which is the end of school, which students, we have to talk about that. We have to see what day in June will work, because there's the Regents Rating Day, we had to call into the state and see, can we even not be here,
The last
like.
SUPS conference day, the last day of school is the superintendent's conference day, and as we talked about previously, it's not the ideal day to have a learning session on the very last day. So we just have to cross-check with the state around, it's also Regents Rating Day. Are we able to legally do that?
Right.
If that's the day.
To do what?
To not
Take a
take
day off.
that.
The day.
But the
second day.
Regents Rating Day is the day after the last day of school.
Right, but
Whatever
that's,
the SUPS
right,
conference day is, because it wouldn't impact
students.
students
Right.
and families.
Right.
Which is why we're thinking
So-
about it.
Why wouldn't we want to do Wednesday and Thursday, the 22nd and 23rd? Choose those 2 days.
Let me just look at the calendar, because there was, one is definitely, let me just look.
Yeah, I'd like to push this back 2 weeks.
So-
I don't think a lot of
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of families that work that Friday.
Okay.
I don't think, this is not a national holiday for families that work, and that Friday is gonna be a struggle for daycare.
I know, that's exactly what my thought was, Jeremy, but now I'm thinking that like any type days, the 22nd and 23rd would be difficult days too.
So can I suggest this, that we look at that suggestion, 22nd, 23rd? You were researching some stuff on whether that was or wasn't feasible, and just maybe reminding us of the side letter, you can
Yep.
send it, just give us a
Sure.
link, and I know it's somewhere in the board docs.
Yeah,
It's
no,
either-
I'll send it to you.
So we just table it to the next
Yeah,
meeting?
so let's table
Yeah,
that
that's
to the 18th. Okay, second public comment. No one here. Board comments.
I have one comment. I just wanted to bring to the attention of Bill and Melissa that the other day, I got, at like 1 o'clock, I got an email from Eliana's Gmail account that some student had created for her, where she had a shirt from the Gap that she wanted me to order for her. And I found that very disturbing on many levels. Like, why is she able to access a Gmail account on her school computer? Why is she sending me an email at 1 o'clock? Why is she able to get on the Gap? And she said it was because they were done with her learning in the class that she was in, and the teacher said that they could do whatever they wanted on their computers. This is my fear of the computers in the classroom, what's happening with, how things are being monitored, what the access is. I'm sure if you guys talk to your kids, use computers, that's pretty mild, according to Eliana, about what kids do on their computers actually during class, and one girl constantly getting yelled at for playing games on her computer. So, Jeremy brought up the technology earlier, and I think it's something important to note. I know there's a technology committee, we're figuring it out, but I don't think we've perfected it yet. And I just want to bring up, there are some anecdotal stories, but, this is something very specific that happened to me that I wanted to bring up and let you know what's happening.
I'll say a broad comment which is quite positive. I know the after 3 p.m. Extra school time that kids are having, parents are really, I don't know whether it's just Hillside, but parents, you know what I'm talking
Yes.
about, right? Parents are very happy, and I just want to publicly recognize it. It's been helpful. I've had, when I'm leaving, I'll have parents that they think I know them, but saying that, oh, it's really good, my child is and I'm like, oh, yeah. So I just wanted to say thank you for that extra, because, the pandemic has really affected a lot of the academic fitness, but that is frightening to hear, Dory.
Thank you to administrators.
Yes, thank you.
Do you have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
We just want to
Oh.
remind,
Sorry.
Yeah.
On there, yeah.
yeah, just to remind you, next meeting, the 19th of, that would be April, the month we're in. Just to remind you, would be the budget adoption is the main item. You've got your regular updates, construction update, and then we'll bring back this calendar item to you. So that's the next meeting.
Okay.
And it's too late an hour now, but in the future, if it's earlier than 10:48 at night, you could bring up topics you may want to consider.
Okay.
But
Can I
not at
just say-
10:48 at
No,
night,
I
please.
agree.
Yeah, well, I do have to say one,
But
so.
not at 10:48 at night, please. What is it, Maureen? Go ahead.
Well, being that the budget newsletter, we were told by, it actually has to be finalized before they'll adopt the budget. Those numbers have to reflect, unless she shifts her schedule.
We'll have to have her shift her schedule, 'cause they're voting.
She's gonna
on
have
it
to
next
shift her
meeting.
meaning so we're working
How
the
would we
budget
finalize
newsletter.
before we vote on it?
She wants to kind of get it in prep, but
No.
I'm not.
No.
Okay.
Right? It's-
Well, remember the 15th, she wanted me to
What?
go over it, now who's.
We can go over it, but, don't you agree?
No, I do, but then
Communication
we,
associate can't set our budget.
no, I agree with that, but then I'm saying that the schedule went over today, I'm gonna have to have her move it back, and she's gonna have to work it, because we won't then have that number till the 19th.
When does it have to go out by?
It has to go out, it only has to be mailed like by May, 1st or 2nd, because it has to go to bulk mailing, and then it
Yeah,
has to be in
I have a
advance.
solution. We can basically.
Oh, I'm fine with that,
We can
it makes
basically.
my life, I
all
was
writ-
gonna have to work next week.
Yeah, we
to
can
do it, so.
We can get it basically all written other than some numbers.
Well, all the charts have numbers, so anything.
Yeah, but there's a
they
lot
could-
else in it.
Yeah, yeah, I know,
There's a lot else in it. We can
Yeah, I'm-
get her working.
I'm fine with that.
So we'll have her redo those numbers, dates, right, Maureen? This-
Yeah, she just has to push it out to
Yeah,
push it
yeah.
a week or more, a week off of when she wanted it to be typed up.
Speaking of which, who wants to take a shot at writing
Reggie
the prime
Rosado.
budget?
I can try, if you give me like a
Okay, I'll
template
work
or,
with you.
okay, just tell me what
There's
you,
one. That's last year. or a couple
and you
years.
mean like the sort of overview page?
Yeah,
That page right there.
Okay.
we can use the FAQ stuff you guys put together.
When do you want
He
to apply?
definitely needs more.
When do you want to apply?
We'll just email, we'll figure it out. We gotta get the timing down, right?
Yeah, I think the only, I guess with that one, it may be, if you thought it was any longer than that existed, it may have an impact on like the remainder. Everything else I'm doing is within its footprint, so,
Okay, no, I would give you maybe a couple
Yeah.
different links.
yeah.
Well, we should talk about that FAQ document you guys put together, because I think that fodder is good for that. It's not
Yeah.
dissimilar from what we did.
She's
for-
already, yeah,
Okay, good.
yeah. Fiona's already working on laying this, Fiona Mitchell's a communication associate interim. She's done this actually a lot in other districts, so that's why she's got a very detailed calendar laid out, which we will not have her modify, but much of that she can still write. And then, so she's gonna be featuring the bond work, gonna be featuring special ed, and sort of other things. So she can get busy on that. And then the front matters, of course, and then it's just what you actually vote on will be then what we got to plug and play.
Yep,
Have a nice break next week, everyone.
thank you.